nos acompaña el profesor Eberhard Schultz de la Fundación Eberhard Schultz por los Derechos Humanos Sociales y la Participación de Alemania, que bueno, va a discursar sobre esta temática en esta mañana. Una persona muy conocedora de los derechos humanos y sobre todo en particular los derechos humanos sociales, y que ha estado muy cerca también de la realidad cubana, de nuestras luchas por los derechos humanos, y espero que sea enriquecedor para todos.
Gracias. I prepared to speak in German with a translation, and my English is not so perfect, but I will try to do it in English. If you excuse my bad English, school English. I would start with a short introduction. It's the third time I have the honor to participate in the José Martí conference, and so I think some of you may know me, and you will get the whole contribution, the whole text in English, in Spanish, in the documents of the conference. Okay, so now I must change the text from the German to the English. In the contribution today, I will concentrate on 2 points: the realization of the basic human rights in the two countries, Germany and Cuba, especially the social human rights, which are underrepresented in Germany and in Europe. Shortly about my person: since 1978, I'm a lawyer and working as a human rights lawyer in Berlin, member of several institutions like the International League of Human Rights in the board, and I have participated, as I told you already, I think 2016 and 2019 in Havana in this conference. I was one of the members of the international board of the Cuban Five, and working also in other international courts and like the European Court of Human Rights and others. So, and in 2011, I've founded with my wife Azize Tank, who is here also, the Foundation of Social Human Rights and Participation in Germany. And my son, Dr. Rainer Schultz, is working and living in Havana for many years as director of the Casa Cuba in Havana. So that may be enough for my person. The foundation, some short remarks on our foundation. For us, the main purpose, the main aim is the UN Social Human Rights Pact, as we say shortly, of 1966, which is internationally bounding right. And participation means especially the participation of people coming from other countries, migration, refugees, and also people who have some problems maybe in their physical or mental capacities. This is the second main aim of our foundation. Yeah, then I come to the main factors as we see it at the moment in the world, and especially also in Germany. This means what we say, the increase of social division. I may we made a press statement from our foundation to the International Day of Human Rights, as you know, in 10th of December, maybe last year, and we said it's still one of the main purposes of the international community to realize them all together, and not only recommending and saying we are the masters of human rights, but only pointing with the finger to other states. You did not realize the human right of freedom of press or of freedom of expression or something like that. But we say the main problem, always the main aim should be their own country, their own state. As Rosa Luxemburg, I think you know her, said, and Karl Liebknecht, der Hauptfeind steht im eigenen Land. The main enemy is in your own country and not somewhere abroad. This is very important for all the capitalist states, especially also for Germany. So, then there is a very interesting declaration just 1 month ago, on the 10th of December, on the International Day of Human Rights. The General Secretary of the United Nations, he was mentioned yesterday, I think, Antonio Guterres, made a short press release, and he said, I quote, I hope I can read it. Oh, can you help me to this?
Read this.
Yeah.
The world is facing an unprecedented and interlocking changes to human rights. This trying time called for a reignition of our commitment to the human rights, civil, cultural, economic, and political and social. On these Human Rights Days, we reaffirm the universality and indivisibility of all rights as we stand up for human rights for all.
So, thank you very much. A quotation from the official statement of the Secretary, and as you hear, especially also the social human rights he mentioned. So, then I have in my written text, you will get with the material from the conference, from excerpts of our member who is working with our foundation, Professor Dr. Eichenhofer, who's the expert on social human rights in Germany. This is too long and too special to quote all this here now, but I will come to our official ein Aufruf. The Foundation has summarized the development in an appeal we made last year, 3 months ago, which is called Call for the Joint Realization of the Social Human Rights to Social Security for All. There is a special human rights, social human rights of social security for all. And maybe may I ask you again to read the...
Which part?
Yeah.
All the
Yeah, please. It's very important, I think.
This social right to social security, which was already proclaimed in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights of 1947 and concretized in the International Covenant on Economic, Social and Cultural Rights of 1966, is more current than ever. This is being further underlined, especially by raising living costs, which a veritable horror list. In heating and energy cost, natural gas plus 75.1%, firewood more than 56%, and diesel more than 40%. For food, sunflower oil more than 82%, and whole milk more than 27.4%. This increase in the cost of living not only marginalized the already poor, but also affects the lower and middle income class the most. Inflation, being at its highest in the 15 years, is influencing all aspects of life. More and more people have to take advantage of food banks and are insurance how they are going to get through a cold winter. At the same time, the rich are getting richer and the social gap is widening. Social associations are therefore calling for urgent remedial actions. The resources for this are available. 100 billion euros for all our tax money are inclusively spent on the armaments. Giving away money to help people and corporations is one of things, but spending 100 billion euros for armament without democratic decision-making and without clear aims in the other side of the middle. It is therefore not surprising that protests are increasing nationwide and strikes have been announced. According to a public opinion poll, half of those interviewed with persons have declared to take their demands on the street. So we are obviously marching toward a hot fall. We propose an additional important instrument to strengthen the pressure of those responsible.
Thank you very much. You read until, where did you stop? Here. So how important this aspect is actually may be realized if you read the new Declaration of Oxfam. I don't know whether you have heard, it's an international, well-known NGO, Oxfam, who just made a big statement on the World Forum, Economic Forum in Davos. And I can tell you what they made. I quote one or two sentences of this statement. In Germany, 81% of the total increase in, difficult for me to, total increase
in wealth generated. In Germany, 81% of the total increase of wealth generated between 2020 and 2021 went to richest 1%, while the remaining 99% of the population received only 19%.
That's, I think, are figures and numbers. You can't imagine what it means for the people themselves. And of course, the development in the world is similar, as you can read from the Oxfam statement. Now, I come to the second part, the positive aspect. And this is, as I would call it, and I called it already in our last, in the last conference, we participated, Cuba in a good Verfassung, what you say in English already, Cuba in a good constitution. There, I don't want to bore you with, you probably know the new constitutional paragraphs and important new rights for people, families, LGBTQ, and so on. This may be called a ray of hope, extensive realization of important social human rights in Cuba. As you may know, surely, the social human right of there are two main social human rights I would mention now. The right of Bildung, where was it? Of education without any expenses for the people, for the whole life. In Cuba, they have the right to, for instance, go to universities, to schools, to special institutions without paying one pence for it. And the other is the social human right of the best possible health and health care. As you may know, Cuba is one of the world leading states in this aspect, and I can imagine personally what it means that already in the last century, because I have the same problems with my eyes and, as we say, green star and so on, several operations, Cuba organized with the medicines and their staff that 3 million people of Latin America who were already blind got their eyes again and could see. 3 million without paying anything. Of course, the people who have had the money in Brazil or in other countries, they could go to the hospital and make the operations necessary, and then they could see again, but not the poor. And as you know, probably the same problem in the same problem nowadays, extremely annoying development in Italy. Italy, one department of Italy asked for a brigade of medicines with their staff to come to help them because the hospitals breaking down and they couldn't make any more help to the people. Then Cuba and the Cuban authorities decided to send a brigade of medicines and their staff to Italy. And they went there just, I think, 1 or 2 months ago. And what happened? The whole media, the leading media in Europe, was shouting, oh, it's impossible, Cuba is violating the human rights, and now you use the Cuban medicines to help our people. Are you crazy? And so on. So this is one example only, which shows the double standard, which is one of the most important aspects. Of course, in every country of the world, we have, every year we have, for instance, from Amnesty International and other human rights organizations, reports of all the countries in the world. I think of 189 countries, more than 140 violated every year important human rights. That's normal. There is no, if you work, if you fight, of course, always it happens. The only problem is whether there are remedies and whether there is a difference between the poor and the rich. The rich in Germany, if they violate human rights or even institutions and so on, if they betray the state of 30 million of euros, about the same sum in dollars, what happens? Well, they are condemned, they go to prison in November, and in December for Christmas they are released already. That's all, for 30 millions, to give you one example. And I would close, as I told you, you can read all the details and the facts and the comments in the written text when you get the book from the conference. Maybe one to close up with a funny experience. The German translation service of the United Nations, there is a special translation service, official, from the German state. Every week they make the translation of the important developments and especially the comments and resolutions, the resolutions of the General Assembly, every week from last week. And as you probably know about the General Assembly voted against the US embargo to Cuba. I don't remember, 189 to 2? Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's right, okay. 189 to 2. And I looked in the translation service of the German UN department. Next week, nothing. The week After, nothing. After 3 weeks, I wrote a letter, an email to them, asking, excuse me, didn't you realize there was an important declaration of the General Assembly, which is very seldom, that 189 states vote against one or another. Please tell me why you didn't publish that and translate it. No answer. I think the General Assembly, that was 14th of November or some in November, and surprisingly enough, on the 24th of December, the so-called Holy Evening in Germany, I got the message from the German Übersetzungsdienst translation service of this important event of the General Assembly. So I don't know whether it was my letter I wrote to them, or why they suddenly did it on the Holy Evening. Maybe they thought, oh, on the so-called Holy Evening, most of the Germans have no time to look at their email coming from the German Übersetzungsdienst. But I don't know exactly. So I may stop here, and what now we make questions and answers. Yeah, please.
Si alguien tiene alguna pregunta, if you have any question, any comment. Yes.
Can you hear me? Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Yes. Thank you. Dankeschön. Sehr interessant. I come from New Zealand, and one of the issues we have is to be able to debate the question of the oppression of Palestinians, and we have a very strong group of people who suggest that if we bring up the question of Palestinians, we are attacking Jewish people and being anti-Semitic. I have read, ich habe gelesen, that in Germany there have been some very strong laws passed which can make it difficult to talk about the Palestinian issue. Could you comment whether that is happening and is actually true? Thank you.
Yes, I think a very important question. Especially because I'm engaged for decades for the Palestinian parties and authorities also in Germany, which is very difficult. As we say in Germany, Israel is Staatsräson. Israel is state raison, raison d'etat. You don't have the right to criticize Israel. And of course we are for the resolution of the UN, for this two-state resolution. And but the Zionists in Israel, who are at the moment again very strong, they don't bother about this official right and importance. And one aspect is amazing, incredible. You know perhaps the official statement and report of Amnesty International on Israel. They worked for 2 years on it with scientists, with going to the country, questioning people, authorities, institutions, and so on. And they came to the conclusion, official conclusion, that Israel is an Apartheidsstaat, ein völkerrechtswidriger Apartheidsstaat. Apartheid state, I don't know whether this is the right expression in English, against the people, the right of the international right. And what happened? It was published in London, but the German section of Amnesty refused to publish it. It's incredible. And only after protests from many sides and especially from the head of Amnesty, I don't know whether you know Amnesty, I have been there for sometimes in London, seeing my clients and working with Amnesty in Belmarsh prison and so on. It's a very hierarchic organization, nearly military, I would say. And they insisted that the German section has to publish this and to stay to it. And so they had to do it. Thank you.
Any other? Any comment, any question? Okay.
If not, I may make a short summary, a short...
If you want to.
Yeah.
Okay, Anas, any question?
Hello, my name is Violeta, I'm coming from Slovenia, and I have a question. Where do you see the strength, globally or in the EU, to revert the process of decrease of human rights and bring it back on the agenda as the foundation of a humanity, not political foundation, but the foundation of humanity? Can you see that this can be done in a peaceful, gradual way?
Yeah, that's also a very important and difficult question. Our foundation, for instance, for the social human rights is the only foundation, not only in Germany, but in the so-called German-speaking Rome, like Switzerland, parts of Switzerland, Austria and so on, the only foundation which has this aim to reinforce the social human rights. There are, of course, many organizations or NGOs who are working on different fields. For instance, for the right of housing. There's a social human rights that everybody has the right to a house or a flat. He can pay or she can pay. She is able to pay. And in Germany, we have millions of poor who have to live on the street. It's incredible. And in this aspect, and on the other hand, we have very big enterprise and Deutsche Wohnen and others who make huge millions and billions of dollars every year from renting, building houses and selling them to immense prices. But that, in Berlin last year, we had the elections, and at the same time we had the people could decide on an initiative by a huge number of organizations on the aspect of housing, who fight for enteignen. I don't know the English word at the moment. The big bitte? The big like Deutsche Wohnen, BlackRock and others who who make their profit of it, they had to give up, and the state has to overtake all their houses, their flats, and so on. And this was accepted by 60% of the Berlin population. Incredible, 60%, much more than necessary. So now, this is one of the examples where you can count on, and we have on other in other fields also similar developments, but that's the most important, and which gives you the biggest, or us, the great hope that things may change with all these NGOs from the basis. Yeah.
Good morning. I was wondering that with the recent shift in the German politics concerning the militarization and military spending in Germany, does it makes you fear about the possible militarization also of the global German society, or is it a fear that does not exist? Because we heard that like a tradition of 80 years was switched a little bit with this Ukrainian war, and that now the German government has accepted to send Leopard tanks to the war. Does it make you fear as a human rights activist on a possible militarization of the German society, or is it a fear that is much exaggerated? What's your opinion about this question?
Thank you for the question. It's very important and difficult question. I would say it's a broad field to answer it, but some points may be important. Of course, in every morning to night you hear in the television, radio, you can read in the papers, Russia is violating human rights, and especially the Ukraine war makes it very difficult, and China, of course, is incredibly violating all the human rights. We have, of course, also not very strong, but many people, many organizations who are fighting against this effort to make the war much more dangerous than it is already. On my personal opinion, I would say it's the big danger for as we would say in Germany, in Europe, I don't know, in Latin America, of a third world war. And we are already in a war in Germany. Germany just decided to, and Switzerland, for instance, just yesterday, to give the Leopard panzer to Ukraine, which is incredible. That means that they are part of exactly, they can't deny anything and say something about diplomatic efforts or resolutions. But I think, on the other hand, the difficulties for all these states and countries are also evident. What do you say? In short, the situation in Ukraine is very difficult to to analyze in German television. Now they have started to say, well, there are reports from Ukraine that again dozens of civilians have been murdered by Russians, but we can't say, it's not really clear. That's already important, but that is, of course, is not enough. And my personal opinion, that is part of a big campaign of fear and terror against also the German population. You have to obey to our government, to our laws, to our institutions. If not, you will have big problems. And for instance, one example may be interesting for you. We have a so-called NGO, Last Generation. It's a small organization, maybe some 100 people Germany-wide, who are fighting for a better world, as they say, for ecology aims and so on. And they make campaigns. For instance, they make a blockade on the street so that the cars can't come through, or they throw color in big, in großen, wie sagt man, in den Kultur von den Frauen, die für die letzte Generation, Pergamon Museum and other famous places, they throw color on the picture, on the light, and so they are blamed as horrible, incredible. And 2 years ago, there was an official decision of one part in Germany to that this organization is a criminal organization. They have nothing, they don't fight with violence or anything like that, but they are criminal organizations, and they can be held, the people who are working for them or even making a statement for them, they can go to prison for 1 month without anything, just because you said the other day that this is good what they do. We take you to prison for 1 month. So this shows what happens with people who are against this official politics at the moment. It's worse than ever. I'm working for 5 decades now as a lawyer, and I can compare with other periods, but I would say never give up. Hope dies at the end, and we have to fight again. And I was active, maybe I can close with this example, in the '68 movement against the Vietnam War in Germany. And at the beginning, they throwed the people on the street, they throwed stones to us, and they tried to what do you say, spucken, spucken, puke, and we were we were criminalized and so on. But then after some months, the climate changed a little bit. We had a big conference in Berlin with my organization, the SDS at that time, socialist, democratic students in the university with people and, for instance, parties from all over the world, from Vietnam, from Russia, I don't know, but from France and other countries, the communist parties, the left parties and so on came. And after some weeks, we had a demonstration which was called the Big Vietnam Demonstration against the war. Even one famous social democrat took part. And after some months, we were successful together with the international movement against this war and the movement in the States against this war. So that's what I would say. You should never give up. And maybe at the end, I would say we can learn from Cuba one thing, and we have to learn from Cuba. Cuba is a very small country. Opposite is the biggest imperialist power ever in the world. But they fear Cuba so much that they make sanctions, embargoes, and incredible financial problems. Why? Because the socialist Cuba still is a very important example for, obviously, for all the people. And they fear that the poor and those who are underprivileged in the States see, oh, why don't we try their way and their efforts? That's what we have to learn from Cuba. Thank you.
Bueno, si no hay otra pregunta o otro comentario, quería hacer un sumario de su presentación. He wants to offer a summary of his lecture now.
No, that was my summary.
Oh, that was it.
To learn from Cuba.
Bueno, muchas gracias a todos. ¿Sí? Okay. Go to the microphone, please.
Hello. Thank you. I caught your presentation towards the end. My name is Noel. I'm from South Africa. And we always heard about, from the north and the west, that we should not we should do away with coal mining and coal burning. But when the war started, the Prime Minister of Germany, Mr. Schultz, he came to South Africa, and then the next week or two, Germany started buying all South Africa's coal. So for us, we don't understand what is going on. So my question is at some point Germany going to go back to buying Russian gas, or is Germany going to be burning coal and turning to nuclear power? So thank you.
Is Germany
going to buy the Russian gas again? If they're going to buy the Russian gas again, I don't know if you know that.
I'm not an expert on this question, but as far as I understood the news in the papers, maybe they are going to buy it via other countries, which is stupid, of course, because it's much more expensive and it's has many disadvantages for the people who need gas and electricity and so on. But as you mentioned, you come from South Africa. That reminds me of the history, which is many people don't know. and don't realize nowadays, and that's what I always stress on when I talk about Germany and the German role. You know that after the fight of Nelson Mandela and his movement, the South African state was officially called apartheid state. But who was the last to accept that? After even Britain, Germany. For years they didn't want to accept it. And we have a new report from our foreign minister on human rights, which is, you must read it, it's incredible what they say, some positive aspects, but then they try to point with the fingers on the enemy states, which means they have a list of 30 countries at the end about their violation and problems with human rights. Of course, there is mentioned Cuba, Russia, and so on, but not one word about Israel. No problem. Israel, Brazil, no problem, obviously, and others. They are not even mentioned, those who violate the human rights, if you want, the most in the world. World master. So Germany is world master of the human rights, but very, as we say, einseitig, one-sided, and they deny the most important facts. Thank you.
Bueno, muchas gracias a todos por participar y por hacer el esfuerzo por entendernos.
Thank you for your help. Wonderful.
I wasn't prepared, but...
I know. It was not.
Bueno, muy buenos días. Les proponemos continuar nuestras sesiones de trabajo. Por favor. Gracias. Bueno, muy buenos días nuevamente. Tengo el gran placer de presentarles ahora al compañero Peter Mertens, quien es sociólogo de profesión, pero actualmente es el secretario general del Partido del Trabajo de Bélgica, del cual fue su presidente desde el año 2008 hasta el pasado año 2022. También es miembro del Parlamento Federal de Bélgica, pero Peter es un autor político, un columnista que ha publicado en diferentes medios de prensa y también publicado libros que se han convertido en bestsellers. Quiero resaltar entre ellos Cómo se atreven, publicado en el año 2011, que tuvo un gran éxito en Europa con más de 25.000 copias vendidas en diferentes países e idiomas. Bueno, Peter nos va a presentar hoy su presentación va a ser sobre el tema la crisis en Europa, el cambio fundamental que hay que hacer y el papel de la clase obrera. Tenemos 50 minutos para esta sesión antes de nuestro próximo presentador. Entonces, allow me to introduce my comrade Peter Mertens, which is a sociologist in profession. Peter is a current General Secretary of the Worker Party of Belgium, and he was the president of the party from 2008 to 2022, last year. But Peter is also a member of the Federal Chamber of Belgium. He is also a political author. He published an important a bestseller in 2011, How They Dare is a name, that was very successful in Europe. He sold more than 20,000 copies. And he will introduce his presentation with the crisis in Europa, the fundamental change that have to be done, and the role of the working class. Peter, you have the floor, please.
Okay, thank you, comrade. It's a pleasure. All right. It's a pleasure to yeah, feedback, maybe. No? All right. Okay. It's all right. It's a pleasure to be here. I will speak in English, but it's not my native language, but I will do my very best to express myself in English. And it's an honor for me and for us as a small Belgian Workers' Party in a small Belgian country to be here in Cuba at this event for World Balance at a time that is a very special time, we all think in history. And so I will speak briefly with you. I will address some topics with you about the economic situation, about the geopolitical situation in the world, but also about some challenges for the left. But it will be mainly from a European point of view. From our point of view and our experience, it is a small point of view. It's only a Belgian or a European point of view, but you will understand where it comes from. And so I will start with this other event that will be celebrated in Belgium next month. That is next month in Brussels. It will be 175 years ago that two German writers wrote an important book in Brussels. And the book was called The Communist Manifest. And it's exactly 175 years ago that it was written in Brussels, in Belgium. I will get there again. It's just to make some publicity for Brussels, of course, that I mentioned this. But a month ago, it was not in Brussels, but it was in Davos, that there was a meeting. It was already mentioned, of the World Economic Forum in the Swiss Alps, in Davos. It's the highest place, the highest town in Europe, it seems, Davos. So in the highest town in Europe, the highest people of capitalism gathered to make some, not elected at all, you know, but they discuss their fears among themselves about the situation that's coming. And they say the president of this non-elected World Economic Forum, she said 80% of us, they like to talk in percentages, so 80% of us, they are thinking that we are running from one crisis to another. And she calls it a polycrisis. So according to the non-elected president of the non-elected World Economic Forum, we are in the midst of a polycrisis, and they are explaining it's an economical crisis with inflation and recession. It's also an environmental crisis with climate issues and the pandemic. And it's also, of course, a geopolitical crisis with a war and with the international divide. And so, according to this elite of the world, we are in the midst of a polycrisis. And maybe on that point, we agree with the World Economic Forum that maybe even more than in 1848, at the time that Marx and Engels wrote in Brussels their Communist Manifesto, there is some shifts. We are on the eve of some major shifts that are happening in the world, and that's where I will speak on from our point of view. And I will begin with the economic question, because I don't know if it's like that everywhere in the world, but in Europe, in each case, a lot of government leaders, but also central bank leaders and economists, they are trying to assure the people that the world will be soon back to normal. There are a lot of television programs and discussions and newspapers that are saying, no, we are not in a crisis somewhere. It will be normal again very soon. And that the economic levels in Europe will return to pre-pandemic levels very soon. They say almost every day on the news. I don't think it will happen. I don't want to be the pessimist of the day, but I don't think there's a chance that the economies in Europe will be soon returning to the pre-pandemic levels. Because everything I think or we think is indicating that the great moderation and this whole period when inflation remained low and the activity was more or less stable, that this period of 2, 3, 4 decades that is called the great moderation, that this period is behind us. And if we are seeing that the 3 main economic centers in the world, the United States and China and Europe, all 3 are slowing down, all 3 at the same time. And so it means that it cannot be ruled out that a third of the global economy this year in 23 will fall into a recession. And we know, I think, for years that China was the growth locomotive. When there was a sluggish economy, a global economy, it was China who was steering the global economy. But this Chinese locomotive is slowing down itself due to the end of real estate bubble in China, due to setbacks in supply chains, and due also to the pandemic and this erratic evolution of the pandemic in China itself. And so I'm going back to the International Monetary Fund. There, the managing director, he says that for the first time in 40 years, China's growth will be below the global growth. So it won't be China again in the next years that will be the locomotive for the world economy. And so it means, from our point of view, that the global economy never really recovered from the 2008 crisis. We know the 2008 crisis, of course, when the financial elite bailed out private banks and passed the bill to the working class, working people with drastic austerity, and central banks injected thousands of billions of fresh money in the system. But at the end, this so-called free money mostly piled up in the coffers of big business on the one hand, and on the other hand was a fire accelerant for even more debt and speculation. Behind 15 years afterwards, we can say this money went not in the productive sectors, but mostly in the speculative areas of the economy. And then, before even the COVID-19 was there was a new recession announcing itself. And at that time, Germany was the first European country where growth dipped below zero. It was before COVID broke out. So it means before COVID broke out, the patient was already sick. Everyone knows that a sick patient to be less resilient. And so the economy with COVID-19 had to go straight to the intensive care and on a drip immediately, again. And then again, a second injection of massive public money followed to save it, the economy, from the worst. And so it means, again, governments plunged deep into debt with hundreds of billions of euro in bailout plans and direct aid. And so the goal from the beginning, I wrote a book about that, but the goal from the beginning was not to save the people, not to save the human and social rights, not to save small businesses. No, the goal from the beginning on was to save big business in Europe, big companies. So it was monopolies, airlines, car manufacturers and other giants. They received deferrals of payment, they received guarantees and cartloads of money. And meanwhile, tons of ordinary people and small businesses went under. And so even before the pandemic was over, forecasts became again about general recovery of for 2021. And of course, those forecasts neither, there was no general recovery in 21, because we know global manufacturing supply chains were disrupted and they faltered, and prices were already rising steadily months before the war in Ukraine broke out. So it's not true that the inflation problem, it's not true that the supply chain problem, it's not true that the beginning of the recession was only caused or mainly caused with the outbreak of the war in Ukraine. It was already there before. It was already a patient who was sick before, long time sick even. But then, of course, the war, it came as a second blow on a sick patient. And the sick patient who had really never been recovered developed, of course, complications. And all of a sudden, we know that the governments had to arrange in Europe a totally different energy supply. All of a sudden, a totally different, to arrange a totally different energy supply. It's a difficult question to arrange that in short time, due, of course, to the economic sanctions and the counter-sanctions they inflicted on themselves. And so energy and food prices went through the roof because the big monopolies profiteering on this situation. And the grain supply, we know, of a lot of countries in the south was compromised. Governments were pressured to splash out on military spending at the same time. And today, and that's new in this situation, additional debt cannot longer save the system. There will be no period of so-called free money again to save the system. Because the entire, and that means that the entire financial system is facing a huge, stress test in the next period to come. And we know that inflation is everywhere, and even though prices increases are over their double-digit peak of 10% or more, they stay really high, and they will be staying really high in Europe for the next 3 years at least. And meanwhile, food prices will continue to rise. Monetarists want to combat, we know, inflation with, by limiting money supply and so raising the interest rates. And so that means that no more free money politics will be applied to face this crisis. And there will be a stress test of the whole financial system in the period that comes. And we know also that this system of ultra-low interest rates the past 15 years by the central banks in the United States and Europe have pushed public and private debt to records amounts. So the debt rate everywhere is sky high by this politics of so-called free money. And this World Economic Forum, this non-elected elitist World Economic Forum, they say that in the next period, Tunisia, Argentina, Egypt, Ghana, Kenya, Pakistan, Turkey are in imminent danger of a default. So, of course, with all these countries in the south will be the first victim again. And as usual, they are trying to pass the buck of the working class in the global south, and it's somewhere a class war imposed from above in this situation. It is somewhere, again, a class war imposed from above. Okay, I will pass to the second point. So I spoke briefly about our view on the economic situation and on a patient who was already sick. So it was not the war who was, that had caused the problems. The problems were there still, they were there yet, I mean, before the war. And we don't agree with those that are saying that the economic situation will be good again in some months. We don't think it will happen that way. So on the geopolitical level, I will express a little bit my or our point of view as Workers' Party of Belgium. I will be going back to the Cold War, because in our point of view, in the Cold War, during the Cold War, the United States, but between the United States, of course, and the Soviet Union, China was a little bit an outsider at that period. It belonged to neither camps, and if we are honest, in the 1960s, China was at times more critical of Moscow than of Washington. And it means also that globally we think that until the reconciliation or certain reconciliation with the United States in 1971, China had to pursue a development within its own borders, disconnected a little bit from the rest of the world. And then from the 1970s on, China began to attract foreign capital, and by the late 1990s, Chinese economy was for a huge percentage integrated in the global world economical system. And it imported raw materials, exported manufactured goods and services, and increasingly engaged in foreign trade, and it started to develop also, as we know, the new Silk Road. And in hindsight, despite their rivalry, Washington and Beijing complemented each other during that period, we think. So because when at the time that China was industrialization was going forward, the economy in the US was more financialized. So you had industrialization on the one hand in China, and at the same time you had the financialization of the economy in China. And this went together. There was a development at the same time. And then in 2001 that we know China became a member of the World Trade Organization. And it was, in our point of view, mainly US President Barack Obama that put an end to this parallel development with this pivot to Asia politics. He explicitly set his sights on Beijing and threatened with a trade war with Beijing. In this way, he wanted to prevent China, of course, from standing completely on its own feet technologically and being able to threaten the American hegemony in the future. And so after Barack Obama, there was Donald Trump. He, of course, continued the trade war with all sorts of protectionist measures, also in America, make America great again. Okay. And then after Trump, Biden also, the Biden administration didn't change that politics. He increased the pressure even more. And so in October 22, they launched, the administration of Biden, they launched a technology war against China, as we know. So Biden banned to China the integrated circuits, the chips, as we say, and advanced integrated circuits, chips, as we say, but also the technology to design these chips and the machinery for producing these chips. And so he wants to stop Beijing from advancing to a high-tech future and to the latest generation of chips, which they would need, which China would need, for this development of artificial intelligence, which is a very important intelligence on the level of technology, and of course also for the most advanced weapons system. So with this technology war that the Biden administration is waging against China, they want to prevent China from a high-tech future. And so, in our opinion, these trade wars and technology wars are widening the gap in the current world trade system. And maybe it is, China and other emerging economies may establish an international trading system separate from the old US-dominated system to secure their position, their own position in the global industrial chain. And so maybe at that time the new Cold War, so the Cold War against China, marks an end of a period of unimpeded capitalist globalization that we have seen since the 1990s. Okay, so now we come to the point what this means for the rest of the world. We see also that more and more countries in this situation are choosing an independent course. And we know that a vast majority of countries rejected Russia's war against Ukraine, but outside the West, few countries are willing to follow the sanction policy imposed by Washington. And this is an unprecedented change, a revolt, as it were, of non-Western countries against the established order internationally. So we see a new group of so-called non-aligned countries. They are no longer wishes to dance to the US tune. And it means that maybe we are again on the beginning of a period, at the end. Sorry, we are maybe at the end of a long unipolar world period of 2 decades or more in which the US dictated everything through its controlled globalization, and of course also with the dollar as an international means of payment. And so many countries of the South have refused to be forced to take sides. But at the same time we see in Europe the other way. So where there is many countries that are refusing to take sides with the United States, it seems that the European Union at the same time becomes more and more dependent on the United States in the midst of this crisis. And that, in that way, the war in Ukraine was a game changer to make Europe more and more dependent of the Pentagon and of Washington. And we know this war in Ukraine cost bags of money, And we talked about it a little bit with the question before, but in Germany, a tradition of 80 years was broken in short time, in really short time. And they spent in short time 100 billion euro on the military. And in this first time, so the after-war consensus, non-military, aggressive military consensus in Germany was wiped out in several weeks. And they spent this new weapon deals, not in France, but mainly in the United States. So it was profit in the United States with the big weapon industry. The military complex was gaining a lot of this new stance in Germany and in Europe, because there was this German wall, this German anti-war wall that was broken. And afterwards, we saw also in Belgium, we saw also in Denmark, Sweden, Lithuania, France, Poland, they did all the same. They are militarizing their economy, they are increasing their military spending everywhere, and they're buying equipment mainly in the United States. So the United States, the military complex, is winning also on this situation in Europe economically. And then at the same time, it has to be said, in Europe, this war has two sides. There is the war at itself, but there is also an economic war that will be waged again with cuts on public spending. In Belgium, even now, the wages are blocked. Right? There is inflation, but the wages are blocked. In France, there is big strikes because the wages are blocked. Because all this money that's going to the war machine cannot be spent to public means, of course. So this war has also social consequences. It's the same war in the inside as a social character, and the outside as a military character. And that was not enough, because at the same time the US forced Europeans to tear up gas contracts with Moscow. We know it was because of the US pressure that all of a sudden all European countries had to tear up the gas contracts with Moscow and to look for alternatives. And one of these alternatives is the extremely expensive American shale gas. So now everywhere in Europe they are constructing this special ports. It cost a lot of money to import the shale gas from the United States. And who is winning from that situation? Of course, again, the United States economy. Of course, these big energy companies in the United States. And for example, one example, last fall, when a ship of tanker ship with liquefied gas parted in the United States, it was worth 60 million euro when it was starting in the United States. When it arrived in Europe, it was worth 300 million euro. And so it's the Europeans, they are paying the American industry in all this situation. I can continue, I will not continue, but other effects also, because, for example, the ban of this ship producing against China, it affects also European factories. In the Netherlands, there is ASML, it's a big chip producing factories. It will maybe go bankrupt because of the ban of the United States against China. And we know also there is the Carl Zeiss factory in Germany, who is also dependent on the export of chips to China. So it will affect Europe a lot. And we know that that is not enough for the White House or for the Pentagon. Because at the same time, so they are winning on the military complex, they are winning on the gas and energy complex, but it's not enough. At the same time, they are waging a very protectionist politics in the United States, and they passed the so-called Inflation Reduction Act, which they will provide $370 billion of subsidies to businesses the next 9 years. And it's a so-called climate protection program. They're very good in this publicity about their protection. It's good for the climate, huh? Our protectionism. It means that, for example, for e-cars, for batteries, they will give a lot of subsidies. And so it means also they are buying out a little bit the European car factories, the products, those who produce batteries elsewhere in the world, because it's the own politics at the same time. And when at the same time in Germany the energy pricing are rising, it becomes clear why some energy-intensive companies and chemical giants like BASF is a very big chemical plant, historically a big chemical plant, not only in Germany, it's German-based, but also like in Belgium, very present. But they are reflecting about moving some parts of their production to the United States. Tata Chemicals in the same time, and so on and so on. So, in fact, with this politics after the war breakout, the United States is waging a politics of deindustrialization of Europe. That's what is happening. It's very taboo to say that, of course, but that is really what is happening economically. They are getting there. And what surprised me, it had not to surprise me, but still it surprised me, is that the reaction of the European policy was very moderate, was not there at all. There was no reaction of the European Union at all. And we see at the moment that in Brussels they are increasingly tagging along with Washington, and that the supporters from an independent European Union are on the defensive for the moment. They are there, I think. They were there in Germany, they are there in France, they are there in Europe, but for the moment they are very, very quiet, and they are very, very on the defensive. It does not mean they cannot go on the offensive one time, but at this time it is Washington who is controlling the developments also in Europe, and it's a big shift that is happening in Europe at that point. And so in our point of view, the world tectonic plates are shaking, and in the foreseeable future we know that two of the world's three largest economies will be Asian. It will be China and India. And when an emerging power puts pressure on the regional or international hegemony of an established power, as China does with the United States, it has a nice name, it's called Thucydides trap. It's a Greek, Thucydides trap. And that's the situation that we're facing globally, we think also in this world, that there is a global established power who is being challenged somewhere by an emerging power, and that is China. But we are, in our point of view, to end this first part, we don't think that a bipolar world is not the only possible option. And in our understanding, China is not in favor itself to a bipolar world with two opposing blocks. And in our understanding, China wants to continue its own path, Chinese path of stability, and continue to trade with the whole of the world. And we think that many forces elsewhere in the world also seek their own development and desire not a unipolar world, of course not, but neither a bipolar world, but a multipolar world. And we support that idea of a multipolar world, of course, as a path essential to address the great challenges of this third millennium. Peace, of course, fight against the inequality, climate, degeneration, global health, the main issues. So it's, I wanted to express our need and our support us this path to a multipolar world and not a unipolar world and not a bipolar world. And I think we are on a shifting world. And as such, it is happening. You don't have to be emotional about this process. It is happening before us. It's a political, economical, climatal process that's happening. And maybe if the social forces are gaining strength, we can push this world in this multipolar, democratic, social, ecological direction. I think that's an objective for the future. So I will end briefly. Okay. No, maybe it's better to end. What's my time? What's the time frame? But I think it's maybe it's better. I had a second part about our situation in Belgium, but Belgium is a very small country, even as it has the headquarters of the NATO and the headquarters of the European Union. It's a very small country, and I wanted to explain a little bit about our conditions as a Workers' Party in Belgium. How did we develop the last 10 years? It was summarized, but the text I presented now, I have some copies in English and in Spanish. Yes, I had to say it on the beginning, of course, no. But those who are interested about the text and about our vision as the Workers' Party of Belgium, they can address to me to have this copy. I have some copies here So I will close there, and even if there is some questions on our party or our position on it's up to you to ask to me. Thank you for your attention.
Gracias. Gracias, Peter. Pero sería muy interesante que leyeran o escucharlo a él del trabajo que han hecho en Bélgica, el Partido del Trabajo de Bélgica, porque en las últimas elecciones, incluyendo las elecciones europeas, han tenido un resultado fantástico, un incremento importante de votantes, de asientos en el Parlamento. Por lo tanto, es interesante conocer esa experiencia. Entonces, bueno, si hay alguna pregunta, algún interés, por favor. Put the green.
Thank you really for this interesting analysis of the international and European situation. I think it's really fundamental. I will make the question in English, despite I think our common language is French. We really appreciate and inclusively admire the working of the Workers' Party of Belgium and your opposition to the imperialist war, your positions of opposition against neoliberalism in the European Union. And unfortunately, we doesn't have in France a strong Workers' Party represented in the parliament that can make something an opposition to the war. No? You see that they support the warmongering efforts of the government. I wanted to ask you, and maybe you can go to the way of the part you wanted to explain. So, what are the possibilities of progressive democratic change for the European countries, inclusively a transition to socialism? In the actual framework of European Union, as we know, that is constituted on the basis of neoliberalism, the treaties are on this basis, and we saw what happened in Greece, no, in 2015 when the Greek people voted for a radical left change. They doesn't allow this to happen. No? What are the possibilities of this, and does it is really possible to reform the actual European Union, or does we have to make some radical change in this? Because we saw in the last year how the European Commission is taking some powers that it didn't have in the treaties and acting like the de facto government And this is a real preoccupation for the European people and for the French, of course.
First of all, I do think we have the advantage that we have a very small country. Donc, there is a lot of disadvantages, but there are some advantages. It means that from a progressive point of view, Belgium, of course, has these two sides. It was a colonial power during its history in Congo, in Africa. It has a colonial history on the one hand, and it has a progressive history on the other hand. These two histories confronting like everywhere, of course. But in the progressive history of Belgium, from below, you had to be a little bit international, and it's an advantage. Like in Belgium, we speak two languages. Some kind of two languages, but we have this, and there is the European Union, and there is Brussels, and it has also an advantage because the reflection has to be international, and I think at this time, in this time frame of the earth, it is an advantage. Because I'm a little bit feared about nationalism and the returning of nationalism on many sides that is returning, and so. I think also, if we go forwards in Europe, there will be on a continental scale at one time some ruptures. And like if you see now the energy prices rising, you have enough is enough in Great Britain, this campaign with strikes and with the strike movement. You have France, this movement, you have in different countries, and there is interaction, and I do agree with the professor when he said, okay, the main enemy also rests in its own country. I do agree with that, but on the other hand, this perspective, to have a European perspective and a world perspective, in my point of view, it's very important. It's very important to continue that. And so on your concrete question, do you think that the European Union as it is can be reformed? I don't think so. The response is no. If your question was, do you think that you have to work inside the European construction as it is now? My response will be yes. It's not because I don't believe you cannot reform, that I do think that you have to pull back from it. I do think you have to be there in the European Parliament, use all these possibilities to create bonds among progressive trade unions, progressive parties, etc., to face the same enemy, to learn from each other. And I do think that if change is going to come at some point in Europe, it will be not only in one country, it will be in several countries, like maybe, okay, each historical thing has its disadvantages, but maybe if this situation, the professor talked about, maybe we are at the edge of a new world war. Let's hope not. Let's hope not, because it will be. But it is a very difficult situation at this time, and we know that the forces against war, they are threatened. We were threatened in the Belgian Parliament, in the European Parliament, with an aggressiveness ideologically enormous. We were friends of Putin. We had not to be invited anymore, ever again, to the national television, etc., etc. Really, it was like that. It was a very aggressive point of view. And I think it was on another scale, another situation, a little bit in 1913, 14, before World War I, when they had to vote the credits for the war in all these parliaments in Europe. But the situation before the World War in 1914 and after the World War in 1918, the perspective was never only have this social change in Russia, only have this social change in Germany. The perspective was more broad than that. And it will not come again this same period, I know, but I want to keep this perspective of change, because we are before a period that can go very fastly in different directions. And that's why we are working inside the European Union. That's why we are saying do I have illusions in the European Union as it is and in the European Union leadership? No, of course, the European Union leadership as it is an imperialist force as itself. It was not a long time ago that there was this discourse in the European Commission, in the European Parliament about a racist discourse, officially so I have no illusions, but I do support the movements in the European Union that are saying that they want to be independent of the United States. You can do the both on the same time. So you have to collaborate with these forces in Europe that say stop to be treated as a state of the United States. It's not because I'm for an independent, autonomous European position in this. Also vis-à-vis China, not only vis-à-vis Russia, but also vis-à-vis China. It is important that the European Union says, okay, we want to continue to have trade with China, and we also want to have a future that is a non-bipolar future. Because in this bipolar future, European Union will be completely dependent on all levels of the United States. So that's the main issue. And the second issue, on the same time, I have no illusions at all that this European Union leadership is some kind of a progressive leadership. But you can't, I will not explain, I had the whole text about being principled on the one hand, and it's always the main thing. Have your principles, have your backbone, good, have your principle. But at the same time, and on the base of your principles, you have to be flexible. You have to have a tactics that is a tactics to win. We want to win. It will not happen in a short term. But our gain is to win. Our gain is not to have papers and leaflets with the truth on it and then and commenting events. That's not our goal. Our goal is to really change this thing. And so you have to have these principles, I think, and also at the same time a tactics to win. Like I think and like I appreciate the Cuban example, I think also they have their principles, and at the same time, like it's been explained, their know-how of the most advanced tactics and their know-how how to cope with maybe not some friendly forces, but in order to create relations, so they have to do to protect the Cuban. And I think it's a very intelligent way to approach things, to have these principles on the one hand and a very, very flexible, but the two on the same time. If you are only principled, you become rigid. If there's only principles, the set of principles, you're very rigid. And on the other hand, if you have only tactics, you have no backbone, so you're weak. So, and principles, and that's our point of view. But I wrote it a little bit down in the text, so.
Oh, push the green. Thank you. Thank you very much. That was very interesting. My name is Stanley Knight. I'm president of the World Affairs Council of Napa Valley in California. And I bring you greetings from wine country in California. Thank you very much for your remarks. And I've been watching the situation in Europe and Ukraine and Russia with great interest. We don't get a very balanced view in the mainstream media in the United States. And some of the things that you talked about underline the concerns I have that there are some very major structural shifts going on in Europe and the United States and in the financial world and in the military-industrial complex that could be setting up Europe and the United States for a very bad outcome for middle class and working class people, because there is so much money being spent now on non-productive assets, i.e. the military-industrial complex, both in the United States and in Europe. That money goes into non-productive sunk costs, i.e. weaponry, also causes destruction in Ukraine, for example, the economy of Ukraine, the refugees that are costing Europe, whereas that money could ordinarily be spent on investments, if you will, in social programs or whatever. But military spending, the military industrial complex in the United States is, they're being written checks hand over fist in Washington, and their shareholders are very, very happy. But it does not seem like from a popular point of view, a very productive type of investment. Also, the shift in the energy policy, the pressure that's coming on Europe to shift their energy sources to the United States is also very inefficient, it seems to me. That's, of course, as you mentioned, driving up the costs in Europe, cost of energy. Shipping liquid natural gas across the Atlantic Ocean to Europe just seems to me pretty ridiculous. And the debt that all the countries are in now, as you've mentioned, the need to drive interest rates up to try to stem inflation, that further hurts the middle class. I'm bouncing around a little bit here, but I'm trying to kind of throw out some large kind of structural components. The militarist, the military industrial complex spending, that's kind of a non-productive sunk cost, the damage that causes in Ukraine to infrastructure, the cost of refugees, the inefficient shift in the energy policy in Europe that's going to cost a lot for the European people, where the United States corporations are probably benefiting greatly, but at what cost? And I'm worried that these shifts that I'm not explaining very well could be setting up a structural risk of a significant seismic shift that could cause a huge recession and great damage economically to the middle class. I don't know if that makes sense, but I'm trying to convey some large, my wife calls it big animal pictures, that it seems like we're setting ourselves up for potentially a crisis point, a tipping point down the road. And Ukraine, in a way, is the fuse that's causing a lot of these forces to coalesce. Thank you.
No, I do agree, even that before, I do agree with, I do think that there was a problem economically. It was briefly that mentioned before the Ukraine war, even before 2008, but it's another discussion, of course. But after 2008, there was no recovery at all, globally speaking. There was China growing, who was pulling forwards the rest of the world economy. It will not happen in this period, so it will be another period. Recession at what cost, at what degree, I don't know. Officially, there will be a slight recession this year that everyone, I think, economically agrees worldwide, but it can go very fast. And I do agree, there will be two victims, of course. They will, with this interest rating that is going upwards, squeeze even more countries of the global south. That will happen. And on the other hand, have this crisis on the working class people in the United States, in Europe, everywhere. They will. I had a point prepared. It's also in the text. In my kind of view, it's very important to have this working class politics as a left-wing party. It's a discussion at itself. In Europe, I do think also in the United States, there was a bigger discussion that we're going to a post-industrial world. Working class is something of the 60s and the 70s, and now it's all other politics, all other contradictions that are the main contradictions. And it's causing a disaster on the left in Europe. And when I was referring to how we cope with it, for us it was very important to be a working class party and with a class politics. And in each thing we do in our country, we start from a working class position and we start from an economical analysis. Who profits from it? Who does not profit from it? It's a very basic analysis, but you cannot skip that. And then you see the economic sources behind some problems, and you have to educate, agitate, and organize people on this economic analysis. Because if you don't do that again, and if trade unions don't do that again anymore, this all analyzed frame is open for every other aspect. And you have when they kicked out economic analysis, when they kicked out class analysis, when they kicked out all this perspective analysis, in the front door there came all this identitarian discussion inside. And everyone is struggling with everyone on every subject. And there are real contradictions. Of course there are real contradictions in this. But everyone is struggling with everything. We say you have to condemn racism, of course. You have to condemn sexism, of course. Very important. You have to condemn colonialism and colonialist minds, of course. You have to do it really against all racist, sexist, etc. But you always have to do it within a perspective of the unity of the working class and to make the working class power and organization more strong. Always, that has to be the perspectives of this discussion. In all the discussions we have on all these difficult topics, it has to create more power in the trade unions, in the working class politics. But because if you don't do that, all these debates will be becoming dividing debates. And it will weaken the working class on everything. And so, yes to class politics in a broad way. Eh? Yes to class politics again, because otherwise, and I will end, but it passionates me. But because if we don't do that, it will be Vox, it will be Trump, it will be Bolsonaro, it will be all this charlatan of the extreme right as a new messias to cope with the problems. But these people, a lot of people who are voting for the extreme right, who are voting for Rassemblement National in France, who are voting for Vox in Spain, etc. The people who vote for them, we can win again some of these people. We don't have to be, no, you can win. If you have a class politics that is apt, if you have a politics that is apt and very concrete, that you can win some of the votes, and we have to win. We don't have to make half of the working class in all these countries for the extreme right. It is not, I'm convinced, I'm positive on that. That if you have a class politics, if you have a flexible approach, you can win. And we have to do it. We have no choice. We have to win.
Just a quick footnote, and thank you very much. I think you netted out, if my mic is on, what I was getting at down the road, in that these structural changes and events that are going on, the trends that are going on that I tried to highlight, seem to be, or could be leading toward a worse divergence of economic equality, where the global elites, the multinationals, the banks, the military-industrial complex increases their wealth and their share of the economy at the expense of the middle class, I'll call it. So that I guess maybe the tipping point I was talking about could lead to an extreme worsening of the gap between the ultra-elite, wealthy multinationals and class, maybe the political class, or in Washington, for example, versus the general public. It just seems like it's, instead of the economy's building a stronger middle class, it seems like these trends are benefiting the military-industrial complex and the multinational elites at the expense of the middle class.
Any final remarks? Well, thank you so much. Gracias, Peter, por su intervención, por las interesantes ideas que has compartido en la mañana de hoy. Desafortunadamente, tenemos que terminar porque sigue el programa. Tenemos otras presentaciones después de esta, 2 más antes de del horario de almuerzo. Well, thank you, Peter. Thanks for your remarks. But you can find the presentation in the website of the conference, so it will be available for all of you. Thank you so much.
Bien, buenos días. Bueno, un honor inmenso para mí poder presentar a Violeta Bulc, Comisionada Europea de Transporte, empresaria, política, impulsa un movimiento internacional que se ha denominado eco-civilización y que propone un cambio de paradigma civilizatorio. Por lo que hemos podido leer e investigar un poco de este proyecto, encontramos en él muchas ideas, sentimientos, propuestas que se enlazan perfectamente con el ideario, la obra de José Martí, y precisamente con muchos de los temas que se están abordando en esta conferencia por el equilibrio del mundo. Su ponencia se titula La reinvención de nuestra próxima frontera. ¿Estamos preparados para la eco-civilización? Y bueno, sabemos que hay un problema con el tema de la traducción, pero bueno, ya me comentaba que tenía su presentación en inglés, y bueno, por lo visto muchos de los asistentes a este foro, ¿no? Dominan el inglés, así que yo creo que de todas maneras va a poder desarrollarse con calidad, y que podemos después de su intervención entre 30 a 40 minutos, vamos a tratar de cumplir con el tiempo, poder hacer un intercambio de preguntas, de opiniones. Así que yo, sin más, le doy la palabra a Violeta.
Muchas gracias, and I will continue in English. English is not my native language, so I will try to do my best to express my thoughts and the thoughts of people that I represent here today. It's been really educational listening to the first two speakers, and it's somehow, I'm grateful to the organizers, because it seems like they've been putting the sequence in a perfect order. So, please, I intend in this 40 minutes, and I will try to speed it up, that we can have some time for a real discussion, to really try to offer my own and the perspective of so many people that I was privileged to engage over the lifetime, I should say. And really tried first to offer our own point of view on the current state of the world. You will see that it will be a good continuation of what you have heard so far. Next, I'd really like to show how megatrends are challenging our future. And I am so glad that I'm here today, because this huge percentage of the world is really not present in a public life in Europe, and wrongly so. I also like to share my dream with you. I am very optimistic in spite of all the challenges that are happening, and I'd like to bring that optimistic point of view to your table for a critical assessment and consideration. And at the end, I would really like to argue that nobody else, but we are the future we are looking for. And my deep, deep commitment to myself and to life is that I am a proud ancestor of the future generations. So let's see how much we can do that together, and where we can unite and continue to walk the path together. Please. So first, the current state of the world, please. I think right now, the gentlemen before me really described well this concept of a VUCA world, which is very volatile, very uncertain. I would even say increasingly complex and ambiguous. And I'm asking all of us, are we ready for that? Do we accept the world as it is? Because at the same time, we are seeing these rapid developments in different parts of the world, which for me are the signal of a positive change. Because so many parts of the world are awakening and are trying to pass the message that they have to everybody else. Because of that, it's becoming very unpredictable. Because we never really know where the human spirit will lead us. We never really know which sparkle will ignite the masses. And the history is just telling us this story over and over again. That at the right time, at the right moment, in the right place, the right idea can change the world. At the same time, our world is becoming very paradoxical. And I don't know about you, but many times I ask myself, am I insane? Am I the only one who sees the world differently? Am I the only one who sees these lies and the way how we are deceived in public media? Is this really that only me, or why are we not reacting to that? Why are we not raising our voice and tell our own truth? At the same time, this world is very much tangled. And we see that a little change in one part of the world that has a huge economical impact on all others. And if nothing else, COVID proved us how really tangled we all are, how very closely connected our worlds have become, and how easy it is to manipulate because of that. But at the same time, how easy it is to spread the information, because today we are informed all over the world fairly well if we want to see it. So why is that the problem, the world that we currently lead? Because everything around us is set up to ignore these characteristics. Our world is static. Our structures are static. And anything that we would like to change hits this static structure who wants to defend itself. Being corporate structures, being country structures. Look around. Pretty much all countries are organized the same way. And yet, all the global problems that we try to address with this kind of systems that we set up in the, let me say, industrial age, are not finding the right answers to the global challenges. And let me speak about it a little bit deeper. If we take a look, please, the next slide. If we take a look, how did we get to where we were yesterday and where we are today? We can say that especially Western world pushed the rest of the world in the so-called industrial age, where in the last 300 years, technology was the one who was driving every single move in pretty much all the countries around the world, with few really rare exceptions. And this industrial age started to form a particular mindset. On one hand, the only way that it could grow, because the formulas for economical growth that were embedded in industrial mindset needed growth. In order to grow, you needed to persuade every single person to get engaged, to spend the value that she or he created in order to keep pushing for this machine to keep going. And we created specific educational systems that fit to the needs of industrial age. And I would even argue that maybe that was necessary. Maybe that is what humanity needed. But at the same time, I will ask ourselves and all of you, are we able to see the moment where the shift needs to happen? Like the shift happened about 300 years ago. Like our colleague from the United States already mentioned, are we able to recognize the tipping point where we are still able to rejuvenate ourselves and lead the path of a mutual development? Or are we reaching the tipping point where we will be just another civilization on the pile of the history? And that's how I was very hopeful where the concept of a society 5.0 came from Japan a couple of years ago. And when I started studying, I realized that even that is very much based on the industrial mindset. However, already put the human-centric approach in the middle of that development. And that really challenged me as a person and the circles of my colleagues and friends to start thinking, what is really the next big change that will have to happen for the planet to survive? Because all of a sudden, it was no longer just a question of my family, my country, my continent, but it was a question of a planet itself, because it seemed like somehow we did not want to acknowledge its boundaries, and we started to overconsume everything that we can, like a lunatic caught in the framework of industrial model. Next slide. And at that time, I was working as a businesswoman and a consultant for the development of innovation ecosystems. And all of a sudden, I realized that corporations itself are caught in that mindset. And the analysis that we started to make with corporate environments showed us that the only one who is not changing are big corporations. The big corporations want to dominate. They want to have hierarchical structures. They want to have everything in control, and they want to continue to call people labor force. But those that were challenging them started to think, wait a minute. I mean, if we want to have any chance in establishing ourselves, we got to start investing in knowledge. And knowledge started to make a change. More people had knowledge, more powerful these middle-sized companies became, and they started to challenge the big corporations. And soon they realized that that's not enough, because that was still trapped in the hierarchical structure. And they started to think, wow, maybe we should move forward and finally understand that humans are very important capital that we are investing in. So the corporations companies started to treat human beings as human capital. And innovation started to be the major driving force. But innovation within the established mindset is a very dangerous thing, because you keep pushing for the same mistakes and keep pushing for the same, let's say, order. until some small companies started to realize that actually we have to start understanding human beings as people and try to understand the relationship we have with life, with our planet, with the nature around us. And we can see that this seed started to grow. And with this kind of level of awareness, all over the world, little positive notes are emerging. Different, I call them eco-living labs, community living labs, that started to practice something beyond what the official corporate framework in a collaboration with national state leaders was trying to defend. Because deep inside, and I'm asking you as well, how do you feel? Deep inside, we as humans started to rebel against this overconsumption and endless growth which was destroying everything we still remember was a characteristic of humanity. And this is very quickly what I feel that is happening right now. And many troubles that we see are actually happening on this by much larger scale of deeper insight relationship with life. If the pre-industrial revolution was very much focused on collective, then an individual was actually part of the collective. You could not really easily break away from what the community was thinking. Later on, industrial age really pushed against that, because if you didn't free the individual spirit, you couldn't sell. You couldn't sell the concept of overconsumption. You couldn't sell the concept of a constantly growing economy. Yeah? But it feels like we started to rebel against that, because it's not really giving us food for our emotional world, for our spiritual world, for who we really are as human beings. And I do believe, and there is also a Marty philosophy at the back, I do believe that we started to walk, we have started walking the path in a search of a balance. And if we take a look at what is happening right now, which was well described before, in a corporate world, you see that the old is fighting back with all the means because they are threatened. Because they know that it's just a matter of time when this big corporate dominance will be rejected, because it's all in consumer hands. If you don't buy, they cannot grow. Our awareness is not quite there yet, because we are yet to figure out how to take care of the social stability and social safety net, as we've heard from the first presenter today. Once we figure that out, we don't need big corporations anymore. Next, please. So, and I believe that the secret lies in the really good balance and understanding, first of all, that we are part of the nature and the laws of nature, and the nature as a big ecosystem within which we exist, and at the same time trying to find a balance again and path back to this planetary awareness and consciousness. So first, the first step in industrial age was to move humanity away from nature. Put it behind the factory walls. Push it back into the little cocoons, not allowing to think and learn from what the nature was teaching us. The second one was alienating human being from another human being, saying, computers are enough, technology is enough, as long as you're connected, you have friends, as long as you're connected, you exist. But we know that that's not true. So that was not enough. That's why the cognitive war started. The cognitive war is saying, we need to alienate human beings from themselves to be able to sell the future of industrial age further. And that's where we will see a new concept of the future civilization, which will no longer be based on humanity, has been developed. So I'm asking yourself, what is your response to that? How do you feel? Where are you in this awareness of development of humanity and the planet itself, please? So, what I can say that at this point, being so much alienated, not only from nature, not from only from each other, but also from ourselves, in the, I would say, modern world, which is slowly covering the whole world, depend on percentage of population that is already in, but it's sort of like a glass ceiling. And what I'm not seeing in that emerging world are values of humanity, care as a basic element of our relationship and what makes us human. And I don't see dreams anymore. What are you dreaming about? Because the dream is followed by thought, and the thought makes a change. Every change starts with a thought. So what are you dreaming about? Please. Let's check what megatrends are offering us. First, this famous climate change story. I'm not going to be too provocative, but I will ask yourself, how many of you have looked at the trends in the last couple of millions of years on the planet Earth? If you take a look, a million-year cycle, you will see that planet Earth has gone through so many different climate change cycles already. Because it's a natural behavior of planet Earth. However, I cannot deny the negative impact that we have on these cycles. We speed them up to the point that we deprived ourselves of capacity to adjust. The nature is okay. The nature needs CO2, and it will grow faster if we don't destroy it further. And it will recover itself, but are we humans capable of doing so? So here it's a big question. Can we not change the propulsion engines and not change the technology per se, but can we drop our overconsumption and change it into something else? And then move into coexistence, which will always take a perspective of a planet at every decision. Another, for me, very provocative thing is poverty. Take a look at the trends of poverty of the last couple of decades, and take a look at the amount of money we spent to address the poverty. The poverty is growing, and the expenditure on trying to address the poverty is growing. Don't you think that something is not right with that? So, are we really using the money to address the poverty? Or are we really using the money to help certain interest parties to deliver their products and services where their interests are? Ask yourself, please. The same I would say for pandemic. Have we failed as humanity? We did, definitely. Such a selected way of addressing the challenges without any serious scientific approach and any serious analytical approach to learn from it, I don't think the world has ever seen. Do we really know what is happening as the post-COVID crisis and what is happening with people? All we see is the growing number of depressed people. What we see is a growing number of suicides. What we see is a growing number of sick people. I'm not claiming that the vaccination is responsible for that, but somebody should ask some tough questions and really get some real answers. And let's take a look at digitalization. Digitalization is a great addition of this industrial age to humanity. We connected ourselves, we started to build serious collaborative groups and communities. And we started to learn from each other in a very fast way, which has never been seen before. But all of a sudden, those that are most influential through the current means of wealth, which is money, they started to dream about technology as a goal and no longer a tool. We started to dream that this humanity, this human being, has done its role, playing its role on planet Earth. We started to dream of so-called transhumanization. Is really that what we want? Is really the human being only 0 and 1? And where is the imagination? Where is the spontaneously? Where is the creativity? We're trying to repress that, to serve only a particular mindsets. So, what's next then? The current establishment is offering us the new vision, which is transhumanization. For that, we need enormous amount of concentration of investments in high tech and in the research and development. For that, corporations can no longer afford that the governments lead. They want to have the first and last word. That's why all these challenges and conflicts that we are seeing, I will dare to propose and ask you how you feel about it. Is really the big fight between corporations and states, and corporations try to show us that the states are no longer needed, that they can do their business by far more effectively and in a very more efficient and human sufficient way. Can you imagine the world if this really happens? The purpose of corporation is always to make money on the bottom line, is to satisfy the stakeholders. The purpose of state is always to take care of people and the well-being of people. Are they doing it well or not is a different question. But this is fundamentally different. This is a huge fundamental difference. And if we lose the sovereignty of states, we will be out in the open to become a very easy target of corporate dominance. And I would even argue that transhumanism has a chance and our civilization and humanity will be extinct. And I'm not trying to fear you. I'm a computer engineer by profession. So it's technology, I love it, but I'm also very much aware about negative externalities that it can bring in the hands of the wrong people. And here, of course, I have to offer you the third way. And my proposition is that there is a way forward for humanity, that there is a chance that we can join our forces and we can imagine again something fresh and new. I call it eco-civilization. I'm not saying I'm right, but I'm provoking you. I'm challenging you. I'm inviting you to dare to dream big and dare to even challenge me and all the groups that are behind on this concept, because only that way we will be able to see the way forward together. So let's take a look a little bit closer. Please, just go ahead. At the extinction of civilizations. We are, especially in the West, we are so self-centric. We will dominate the world. Yeah? But take a look just at the last 50,000 years, and you will see a numerous number of civilizations that existed, and of course they disappeared. For many of them we don't even know about anymore. Some we recognize, about few we learn in school. Yeah? And all civilizations have this incredible prosperous rising. They were dominating even for hundreds of years, and then they fail in a matter of a couple of decades. And interesting enough, all of them brought themselves down by themselves. Little bit assisted from a side with the natural cycles, climate change, and similar impacts. So if we take a look at this, favorable conditions, and I'm not going to go into details, this is will be available on the webpage so you can take a closer look. But favorable conditions were always related to fertilized land, to new climate conditions, to discovery of new science, new technology, like, the rise of imperialism was fully assisted by the discovery of iron. Western civilization would never rise if there was no iron and the new type of weapons and the new type of technologies that followed after that. If there was no hunger in Europe, we would never go and sail beyond and discover different continents. But this was the only choice, otherwise Europe would die of hunger. So there is always something that drives the rise of a new civilization. And the prosperity is very interesting, is whenever the societies are open, they prosper. Whenever they're connected, they prosper. And for the same reason, they fail, because they are too slow in addressing new conditions that are happening around them. If they, instead of connecting and engaging, they close their borders and they start eliminating those that are willing to negotiate and work war, and they use war as an element of defense and as an element of dominance. And that is when they start to fail. Please. So, just 1 minute about where these comments are coming from, because you need to know. I was born in Yugoslavia, a socialist country that doesn't exist anymore. So that actually still has a very profound impact on the way how I think and the way how I work. I can see the critical points about why Yugoslavia disappeared, why the socialism in Yugoslavia didn't succeed. And before it failed, I went and studied in the United States and worked for 5 years in Silicon Valley. And I was able to experience neo-capitalism in its core, just to decide when my career was going really well that this is not the place where I would like to raise my kids. So I went back to Europe. And I went back, but my country didn't exist anymore, so I came to Slovenia, proud of my new country, no doubt about the conditions for being, society, knowledge and wisdom and land. Please. So in order to understand a little bit better where this kind of shift could lead, we ask ourselves, okay, so what could be, okay, 40 minutes is over, so I'm going to quickly finish to allow a little bit of a discussion. So we started to ask ourselves, what are the core goals that we might be able to organize our life around? Planet as an ecozone of our galaxy. Can you imagine that? Can you imagine that perspective, that we are actually so unique in the entire universe that we have a responsibility to protect it and to nurture it and to live with it? Relationship-based value creation, that the relationship between you and I is worth more than relationship between two factories or two buildings or one technology, artificial intelligence, and so on. So if we put that as a basis, care will develop automatically. We want to find a way to balance spiral evolution, which constantly goes, everything in the universe is spiral. And then, of course, constantly take an ecosystem view. Out of that, just quickly, these 4 core goals emerged. Universal right for drinking water.
Por su ponencia, yo creo que ha sido muy interesante.
we ran out of time, but I'm here the whole week, so I'll be happy to discuss this further.
You have time for a couple questions?
No tenemos tiempo, porque hay otro panel, sorry.
I don't know if you can hear me.
We can hear you, but unfortunately we're running behind the time, so they ask us not to raise questions, so I will be available for a discussion later. Let's finish the session and then I'll be available. Thank you very much for your attention.
Son las 12:22, así que buenas tardes. Estamos aquí con el compañero Julio Muriente. Lo voy a presentar aquí como catedrático de la Universidad de Puerto Rico y copresidente del movimiento independentista nacional ostosiano de Puerto Rico. Nos acompaña el compañero Edwin, representante de Puerto Rico. Puerto Rico tiene una misión, una representación oficial aquí en nuestro país. Yo creo, Edwin, el único país, ¿no?, donde Puerto Rico tiene una representación es en La Habana, desde hace ya, desde el año 1966. Y bueno, Edwin es el representante, y con nosotros el profesor Julio Muriente, copresidente, como decíamos, del Movimiento Independentista Nacional Ostosiano, que nos va a presentar una conferencia titulada José Martí, Nuestra América y el equilibrio del mundo en el siglo XXI. Nos honra con su presencia. Lo hablamos con él ya hace algún tiempo, lo invitamos y lo convidamos a participar en este encuentro, en este evento, y que nos presentara una ponencia, y bueno, gentilmente ha accedido y aquí lo tenemos con nosotros.
Okay. Buenas tardes. Buenas tardes. Gracias por su presencia.
¿Tú me permites un paréntesis breve?
Por favor.
Me disculpan la informalidad y que interrumpa al ponente, ¿no? Pero yo quiero que el público también conozca, el público presente aquí, que en la audiencia con nosotros, acompañándonos, se encuentra el compañero Óscar López Rivera, luchador independentista que cumplió prisión en los Estados Unidos por 35 años por luchar por la independencia de Puerto Rico. Y yo creo que es algo que debe ser mencionado y destacada su presencia aquí en el auditorio. Bienvenido, Oscar.
Esas son de las interrupciones imprescindibles. Bueno, lo primero que yo tengo que decir, además de tener nada menos que al compañero Oscar aquí presente, es que sea nada menos que Fernando González que me presente acá con ustedes, ¿no? Esto es un privilegiazo, de veras que sí. Es una ocasión de excepción y que ustedes pues, nos acompañen en esta oportunidad que se nos ofrece para transmitirle algunas reflexiones sobre la figura de José Martí desde la perspectiva de Puerto Rico. Voy a leer, y ya Fernando anticipó, mira cómo van conociendo a uno, que seguramente me salga del libreto en algún momento y comience a comentar. Él lo advirtió, casi me dio licencia para hacerlo. ¿Sí, verdad? Agradezco el privilegio que me ha sido concedido de poder dirigirme a ustedes en esta quinta conferencia internacional por el equilibrio del mundo con todos y para el bien de todos. Quiero dedicar estas palabras a una compatriota que ha encarnado el espíritu martiano en su dimensión más trascendental y comprometida, que ha creído de veras que, como bien nos dice la poetisa Lola Rodríguez de Tió, Cuba y Puerto Rico son de un pájaro las dos alas, que tuvo la osadía de penetrar en lo más profundo de las entrañas del monstruo para defender por muchos años la dignidad y el decoro de la Revolución cubana, que ha pasado más de 2 décadas en las cárceles imperiales, sometida a imperdonables vejámenes, con la frente en alto y los principios bien plantados, quien para alegría nuestra acaba de salir de prisión el pasado 8 de enero y que requiere de nosotros y nosotras la solidaridad mayor, el cariño mayor, el reconocimiento mayor. Me refiero a la puertorriqueña Ana Belén Montes, quien con su ejemplo extraordinario nos inspira hoy a continuar la lucha por la libertad y la justicia. A ti, querida Ana Belén, dedico estas palabras. Asimismo, dedico estas palabras a quienes luchan por la independencia y la justicia social en Palestina, las Malvinas y la patria saharaui. Acabo de estar hace unos días allá en los campamentos saharaui, todavía, como decía el compañero delegado, todavía estoy un poco lleno de arena del Sahara. Estuvimos una semana allá con los compañeros en el Congreso del Frente Saharaui, un pueblo hermano a quien admiramos y respetamos profundamente. Hoy día no titubeo en decir que es vanguardia de lucha de la humanidad, desde las condiciones más difíciles, con una valentía, una perseverancia y unas ganas enormes de construir una patria libre y soberana. Al pueblo saharaui nuestro abrazo de siempre. Compañeras y compañeros, me encontraba aquí, en este mismo lugar, el día 28 de enero de 1983. No es que sea viejo, es que empecé joven, que conste. Hace exactamente 40 años. Ese día se conmemoraba el aniversario 130 del natalicio del apóstol José Martí. Había yo llegado a La Habana varios meses antes, designado por el Partido Socialista Puertorriqueño como delegado de la misión de Puerto Rico en Cuba, tarea que hoy asume el compañero Edwin González. recibí una invitación del Instituto Cubano de Amistad con los Pueblos para participar en el evento que se efectuaría en homenaje a Martí. Para mi sorpresa, se me pidió que presentara una ponencia. Oye esto, Fernando. Me asignaron un asesor, el querido y recordado compañero y amigo Ramón de Armas, escritor e historiador distinguido. Con la ayuda y el rigor de Ramón, escribí unas cuartillas atrevidas y las leí ante la multitud. Confieso que con el rubor del iniciado en asuntos mayores. He regresado a este lugar 40 años después. Siento que hay algunos aquí que ni habían nacido. Sí, ¿verdad? Como quien visita altares, a rendir honores y a reafirmar principios y convicciones. Convencido de que Martí sigue siendo fuente inagotable de ideas y propósitos para quienes seguimos dando la batalla en el siglo XXI con el mismo entusiasmo y con más entusiasmo. Hermanas y hermanos, el artículo primero de las bases del Partido Revolucionario Cubano, el PRC, fundado por José Martí el 10 de abril de 1892, establecía que el Partido Revolucionario Cubano se constituía, cito, para lograr con los esfuerzos reunidos de todos los hombres, hoy diríamos los hombres y las mujeres, ¿verdad?, de buena voluntad, la independencia absoluta de la isla de Cuba y fomentar y auxiliar la de Puerto Rico. Repito y subrayo. Para lograr con los esfuerzos reunidos de todos los hombres de buena voluntad la independencia absoluta de la isla de Cuba y fomentar y auxiliar la de Puerto Rico. Esa era la razón de ser del Partido Revolucionario Cubano de Martí. Cuba y Puerto Rico eran entonces las dos últimas colonias que poseía España en América. A pesar de los esfuerzos del libertador Simón Bolívar en el frustrado Congreso Anfictiónico de Panamá, celebrado del 22 de junio al 15 de julio de 1826, y concebido por para la creación de una confederación de los nuevos países nuestroamericanos, intereses particulares de diversos signos impidieron que, entre otras cosas, se coordinara una expedición naval para expulsar a España de esas islas antillanas. Es bueno consignar que en la agenda de esa frustrada conferencia del Congreso Anfictiónico, en esa agenda que no se logró materializar, el punto que proponía esa expedición para la independencia de Cuba y Puerto Rico era el asunto número 3 de la agenda. No era el asunto número 48, o sea, no era el asunto número 80, era el tercer asunto. En otras palabras, para el libertador Simón Bolívar, acabar de sacar el Imperio Español de América y alcanzar la independencia de nuestras islas era un asunto de primer orden. Hace varios años, el presidente de Ecuador, Rafael Correa, llamaba la atención de que en nuestra América no estábamos en una época de cambios, sino en un cambio de época. Que lo que acontecía en nuestros pueblos implicaba transformaciones profundas y radicales que dejarían atrás la situación reinante, que no eran eventos circunstanciales o pasajeros. De igual manera, y en un momento precedente, Martí hablaba de una época nueva que se forjaba progresivamente. En efecto, tras la victoria militar de las 13 colonias norteamericanas contra el Imperio Británico en la guerra de 1776 a 1783, y años más tarde, tras la victoria del pueblo haitiano contra el Imperio Napoleónico el 1 de enero de 1804, 1 de enero, se inició en América un cambio de época, la del nacimiento de nuevos países independientes que irían dejando atrás varios siglos de colonialismo. El 9 de diciembre de 1824, las fuerzas independentistas al mando del general Antonio José Sucre derrotaron definitivamente a los ocupantes españoles en Ayacucho. Esa gran batalla concebida bajo la égida del libertador Simón Bolívar representaría el fin casi total de la presencia del Imperio Español en América. Tanta trascendencia tendría aquel hecho para el libertador Bolívar, que anticipándose a la victoria definitiva convocó al Congreso de Panamá 2 días antes, el 7 de diciembre de 1824, en su afán de avanzar hacia la unidad de las naciones latinoamericanas. Sobre la gran victoria de Ayacucho, diría el libertador, la batalla de Ayacucho es la cumbre de la gloria americana y la obra del general Sucre. La disposición de ella ha sido perfecta y su ejecución divina. Las generaciones venideras esperan la victoria de Ayacucho para bendecirla y contemplarla sentada en el trono de la libertad, dictando a los americanos el ejercicio de sus derechos y el imperio sagrado de la naturaleza. Cierro la cita. En ese mismo momento, he hablado de diciembre de 1824, en ese mismo momento histórico se dio un hecho cuyas consecuencias duran hasta nuestros días. Casi exactamente un año antes de Ayacucho, el 2 de diciembre de 1823, este año se cumplen 2 siglos, el entonces presidente de Estados Unidos, James Monroe, ofreció un mensaje al Congreso de ese país en el que esbozó la política exterior de su gobierno. Estados Unidos, que había surgido de la lucha anticolonial, primera guerra anticolonial victoriosa en América, no lo olvidemos, iba degenerando en un país expansionista y agresivo, según ellos legitimado por el destino manifiesto, es decir, por la gracia divina. A aquella política exterior se le denominó doctrina Monroe. En un principio presentaba una fachada anticolonialista de enfrentamiento a las pretensiones europeas de reconquistar sus colonias en América. La consigna de América para los americanos encubría, como hemos podido constatar durante los pasados 200 años, sus verdaderas intenciones de engullir todo un continente y el planeta entero. Cito, el hemisferio todo nos pertenecerá, como de hecho ya nos pertenece moralmente por la virtud de la superioridad de nuestra raza. Así afirmaba sin ruborizarse el entonces presidente de Estados Unidos, William Taft, en 1912, ya en pleno expansionismo imperialista. Siendo así que durante las primeras 3 décadas del siglo XIX avanzó con fuerza el cambio de época del colonialismo a la primera independencia. Y a la misma vez, simultáneamente, se sentaron las bases para ese otro cambio de época, regresivo y amenazante, el del surgimiento del imperialismo moderno y la dominación neocolonial. Desde las colonias antillanas, que no habían alcanzado su independencia, surgirían personajes con extraordinaria capacidad interpretativa y compromiso revolucionario para entender plenamente y advertir sobre el proceso que se iba dando durante ese siglo, para enjuiciar el rumbo demasiadas veces errático de los países independientes de nuestra América, así como para denunciar con fuerza las intenciones cada vez más evidentes y desenfadadas de la otra América. Primero que todos, José Martí. Un acercamiento a la vida y obra de Martí, a su intenso trabajo propagandístico, a su capacidad como estratega político, como ideólogo, pensador y organizador, como independentista, como republicano. No la República de 1776, 1789 o 1830, sino lo que él llamaba la República Nueva de los albores del siglo XX y revolucionario a su vez. Un acercamiento a esa vida, digo, nos permitirá comprender la trascendencia de esa gran coyuntura que acaecía en las postrimerías del siglo XIX que representa un esfuerzo enorme en el cambio de época iniciado en las postrimerías del siglo XVIII, la del fin progresivo del colonialismo, y a la vez la consolidación del otro cambio de época que nos ha tocado enfrentar a los pueblos del tercer mundo durante los siglos XX y XXI, el del desarrollo del imperialismo moderno encabezado por Estados Unidos. Hay una simultaneidad de estos procesos de cambios de época. Una, la del fin del colonialismo, que no acaba de completarse todavía a finales del siglo XIX, y la otra que va encaminándose, que es la de la forjación del imperialismo moderno, que es lo que nos va a ir conduciendo al siglo que estamos viviendo. Le correspondería ser a Martí, como bien ha indicado el distinguido martiano don Pedro Pablo Rodríguez, cito, un hombre del mundo colonial y subdesarrollado en una coyuntura de tránsito notable del sistema capitalista. Al triunfar la Revolución Cubana, el 1 de enero de 1959, otro 1 de enero de cambios de época, ambos, fíjate qué significación esos 1 de enero en el cambio de época. Yo afirmo que el 1 de enero de 1959 se inició otro cambio de época, que se plantea como gran objetivo la segunda y definitiva independencia de nuestros pueblos, la misma que había preconizado el apóstol ya en 1889. Esta experiencia cubana revolucionaria, a su vez, estuvo precedida históricamente por el triunfo de la Revolución Rusa, primera revolución socialista, en 1917. Se trata, en esencia, repito, de forjar una república nueva, decididamente antiimperialista, una república en la que se va haciendo realidad la máxima cimera que encabeza este evento, con todos y para el bien de todos. No debe pasar inadvertido que el principal antecedente de la lucha revolucionaria en Cuba antes del triunfo del 1 de enero de 1959 fue el ataque al cuartel Moncada, el 26 de julio de 1953, y que, en palabras de nuestro inolvidable Fidel, aquella osada acción fue protagonizada por quienes él llamó la generación del centenario, es decir, la generación del centenario del natalicio de José Martí. Aquella acción, militarmente fracasada, como sabemos, políticamente victoriosa, se dio por sobre todas las cosas inspirada en la vida y el ejemplo del apóstol, como continuidad directa, importante el análisis dialéctico de la continuidad histórica, como continuidad directa del grito de Baire del 24 de febrero de 1895, cuando dio inicio la guerra necesaria, y aún desde antes, desde el grito de Yara el 10 de octubre de 1868. Guerras que, como sabemos, tampoco alcanzaron sus objetivos libertarios. Mientras tanto, Puerto Rico se mantiene como un remanente anacrónico del cambio de época independentista, iniciado en las postrimerías del siglo XVIII y en los primeros años del siglo XIX. Por su parte, Haití, nuestro querido Haití, que hace más de 2 siglos abrió la brecha libertaria nuestra americana, ha sido conducida a la miseria y la desesperación, pagando el precio terrible de ser vanguardia histórica, como también lo ha pagado Cuba, revolucionaria para prevalecer durante los pasados 64 años. Es el precio de abrir brechas en los cambios de época. Puerto Rico asume a Martí como pocos pueblos en primera persona, con la intimidad inevitable de una de aquellas 2 Antillas españolas, como les llamaba a él entonces, con cuya independencia se abriría el camino al equilibrio del mundo, y que eran el primer muro de contención frente al imperialismo que amenazaba ayer como amenaza hoy en nuestra América. Le asumimos en primera persona de la misma manera, con el mismo amor y compromiso con que Martí asumía a Puerto Rico. que no por casualidad son similares nuestras banderas, que no por casualidad los creadores de la nuestra, el 22 de diciembre de 1895, marcharon luego presurosos a la lucha y a la muerte gloriosas en la manigua por la independencia, el gran denominador de nuestros sueños de las dos islas, que para Martí como para Betances, el padre de la patria puertorriqueña, eran una sola. Hoy, Puerto Rico y Cuba siguen siendo ese muro de contención, enfrentando desde la revolución y desde la lucha anticolonial al enemigo del norte. Seguimos siendo la utopía del porvenir que se va haciendo carne. Porque en nuestras islas y en nuestro Caribe se sigue decidiendo la independencia nuestra americana, solidaria y antiimperialista, y ha de abrirse palmo a palmo un proceso equilibrador en América y el mundo. Coinciden en pugna irreconciliable el cambio de época que arranca con la Revolución Cubana y se va esparciendo por nuestra América, el anacronismo colonial de la nación caribeña y latinoamericana que es Puerto Rico, más de 529 años sin un instante de libertad, y el cambio de época imperialista iniciado a finales del siglo XIX contra el cual luchamos hoy y que muestra señales históricas de decadencia en el siglo XXI. En el siglo XXI le ha correspondido a América Latina y el Caribe ser el escenario principal de luchas diversas, complejas y contradictorias, todas ellas enfrentando desde sus singularidades la pretensión imperialista de que prevalezca el desequilibrio del mundo. La gran inspiración ha sido Cuba, y con Cuba, Martí. Vamos descubriendo una suerte de presente continuo y prolongado, de eslabones que se van juntando influenciados por una misma fuerza inspiradora, que ayer es hoy y hoy es el porvenir. Desde la dimensión nuestra americana, 1892, 1895, 1898, 1953, 1959. No me mires demasiado que me emociono. Le digo al compañero acá. Ahora perdí el hilo. Constituyen una gran aportación hacia la gran utopía, el equilibrio del mundo. Como lo constituyen también los procesos políticos, sociales y humanos que van ocurriendo en esta región del planeta desde hace un cuarto de siglo. Sobre todo a partir de la victoria electoral del querido presidente Hugo Chávez Frías en Venezuela en 1998 y la fundación de la República Bolivariana de Venezuela. Como lo es en efecto lo acontecido ayer, anteayer en Buenos Aires, donde se recompone, se revitaliza la comunidad de estados latinoamericanos y caribeños, donde por cierto, como lo dijera el compañero Raúl, allí hay una silla vacía en la CELAC. Hay una silla vacía que es la silla de Puerto Rico. Ha de ser el equilibrio que forjen la solidaridad, la libertad, el respeto a la autodeterminación e independencia, la paz, el amor a la vida y a la hermandad entre nuestros pueblos, que dé fin al desequilibrio existente entre los débiles, los pequeños y los explotados de una parte y los grandes, poderosos y explotadores de otra. Somos conscientes de que al igual que en 1898 y siempre, las fuerzas retardatarias de la historia intentarán impedir que ese proceso avance. Sabemos que el quiebre del desequilibrio planetario prevaleciente significa el enfrentamiento a muerte contra fuerzas fabulosas, agresivas y promotoras de la guerra y la explotación. Somos conscientes también de que el avance de los grandes valores y propósitos que han de distinguir en el futuro, que va siendo presente, ese equilibrio americano y mundial que incansablemente nos predica Martí, es extraordinariamente accidentado, que nuestras luchas en el siglo XXI arrastran las consecuencias nefastas de la revolución industrial y el desarrollo del capitalismo con el calentamiento global y el cambio climático que ya golpea a muchos pueblos, que las fuerzas del fascismo y la guerra se reagrupan y atacan sin piedad con el afán de retrotraer a la humanidad a tiempos tenebrosos que se pensaban superados, que los tambores de guerra no dejan de sonar y la explotación y el saqueo planetario campean por sus respetos. En muchos sentidos, Martí representó para nuestros pueblos en las postrimerías del siglo XIX lo que Bolívar representó en las primeras 3 décadas de ese mismo siglo. Ambos, con sus muertes prematuras y sus vidas trascendentales, merecen el título de libertadores y apóstoles. Por eso, nosotros y nosotras nos proclamamos hoy martianos y bolivarianos, porque ahí están ambos hoy, vigilantes y ceñudos, calzadas aún las botas de campaña en el siglo XXI, porque Martí y Bolívar tienen mucho que hacer en esta América nuestra y en el mundo, porque son el presente y el futuro. Somos optimistas. Tenemos la capacidad, la voluntad y la necesidad de edificar un mundo mejor. Como el río que traza su ruta desde la escorrentía dispersa en la alta montaña hacia sus interminables sinuosidades en el llano, hasta llegar al mar, nuestros pueblos trazan cauces diversos y también llegarán al mar de la libertad. ¿Cuándo? Cuando lleguemos, pero nadie lo dude, llegaremos. Muchas gracias.
Bueno, compañeros, después de escuchar la excelente presentación de compañero Julio Muriente, con su habilidad y su capacidad para sintetizar en la historia y sacar los momentos fundamentales y ponerlos en el contexto y ayudarnos a comprender y a interpretar también la visión desde Puerto Rico y cómo esa visión encaja perfectamente para comprender la lucha del pueblo puertorriqueño y la solidaridad que le debemos a esa lucha desde Cuba y desde todos los países de este continente y del mundo. Le damos la palabra a ustedes para comentarios, preguntas. Asumimos que el compañero está abierto a que se le pregunte y dé sus opiniones. Comentarios, preguntas, adiciones.
Por favor.
Sí, aprietas el botón verde y estás hablando.
Bueno, primero agradecer, muchas gracias compañero, muchas gracias a ICAP y a todas las personas por organizar esa excelente actividad y toda la conferencia también que nos encanta. Muchos de nosotros aquí vienen de Brasil y a muchos nos encanta saber de la lucha del pueblo de Puerto Rico. Y para nosotros era un honor estar con ustedes, estar con los héroes cubanos y con todas las personas y con Oscar Rivera aquí también, que es un gran honor sin duda ninguna. Y para muchos aquí en Brasil tiene como pusieran Brasil de espaldas a Latinoamérica, al resto de Latinoamérica. Y una cosa que es muy importante es recuperar esa capacidad de conocer los procesos de lucha y todo más. Entonces, tal vez, si ustedes, aprovechar que estamos aquí, si ustedes pudieran contar cómo está la lucha por la libertad de Puerto Rico, por la independencia de Puerto Rico, muy rapidito aquí para los compañeros de la Brigada Suramericana de Solidaridad con Cuba que están aquí, sería una oportunidad muy buena y un honor para nosotros. Gracias.
Primero, reconocer la inquietud que tú planteas al principio sobre la situación de Brasil en relación al resto de nuestra América, ese inmenso país tan importante, cuya situación política observamos tan detenidamente por el cariño enorme que le tenemos a Lula y al pueblo brasileño. Lo vemos todo con profunda inquietud, ¿no? Todo cuanto va sucediendo allá. Y aprovecho para transmitir nuestra solidaridad al hermano pueblo brasileño. Antes de tratar de, aunque sea a pinceladas, responder directamente tu pregunta, yo sí hago la observación importante de que ustedes desde Brasil, pero desde lo que los conquistadores llamaban tierra firme, hay que elevar a la conciencia de que hay un escenario en nuestra América que demasiadas veces es obviado desde tierra firme, no solo desde Brasil, desde Argentina, desde Uruguay, desde Chile, y es la región del Caribe y sobre todo del Caribe insular. Es cierto, como ha dicho Benedetti, que el sur también existe, pero este sur comienza al norte. En la historia de este sur es desde el norte, al extremo de que todavía hay países de nuestra América que no recuerdan a la manera que sea el llamado quinto centenario, porque todavía no habían llegado los conquistadores hasta allá abajo. Y entonces hay que reconocer que la región de las Antillas y el Caribe ha sido un escenario de primer orden en los procesos de lucha política y social en nuestra América. Es allí a donde llegan los conquistadores europeos, ¿sí? O sea, es allí donde se dan las primeras. El primer país independiente de nuestra América es Haití, un país antillano, caribeño. La primera revolución socialista es en un país antillano, caribeño. Procesos como los del Salvador, como Nicaragua, se dan en la cuenca del Caribe. Venezuela es un país caribeño, Colombia es un país caribeño. La última colonia importante de toda la región, inicio del imperialismo yanqui, es Puerto Rico, el Caribe. En el Caribe, en la región de las Antillas, hay 8 estados nacionales, islas-naciones, que no miden, muchas de ellas, más de 300, 400 kilómetros cuadrados de superficie. Este año se cumple aniversario 40 de la invasión yanqui contra la isla de Granada y el proceso que encabezaba el compañero Maurice Bishop. La isla de Granada mide 344 kilómetros cuadrados y fue escenario de uno de los procesos más importantes de la historia moderna de nuestra región. En la República Dominicana se cumple aniversario del golpe de Estado contra Juan Bosch y la República Dominicana fue invadida militarmente por los yanquis en el 65. Muchas veces nuestros hermanos de América del Sur no han visto en su vida un soldado yanqui. Hablan del imperialismo, pero nunca han visto un soldado yanqui. Pero los dominicanos sufrieron miles de muertos y los panameños sufrieron miles a manos de los soldados yanquis, como nosotros, como los compañeros cubanos en el caso de Guantánamo. Entonces, digo esto, 8 países, todos miembros de CELAC, todos miembros de ONU. La inmensa Argentina, hasta ayer, fue la presidenta de CELAC. Hoy, el presidente pro tempore de CELAC es una isla que no mide más de 500 y tantos kilómetros cuadrados, que es más bien un archipiélago de pequeñísimas islas, San Vicente y Granadina. El otro día, cuando se organizó la CELAC social, que se organizó en Buenos Aires, hicieron un logo muy bonito, un diseño, con un pequeño problema. En las islas pusieron a Cuba y a la Española y el resto de las islas no lo incluyeron. Y yo escribí y les dije, oigan, ¿dónde está el resto de nuestro Caribe insular? Y les dije así, ¿qué ustedes le van a decir al compañero González, el primer ministro de San Vicente y Granadina, cuando sea electo y designado presidente de CELAC y vea el logo y diga, pero mi país no está aquí? No aparece. Hay una invisibilización de la región, que no es cualquier región, que es gran protagonista de la historia nuestra de los pasados 5 siglos. Fíjense que no estoy hablando de Puerto Rico en lo particular, estoy hablando de la región, y en ese contexto, lógicamente, mi país. Ahora en 2 oraciones te digo, algo que yo menciono en el texto. El último habitante de mi tierra que vivió en libertad, lo hizo hace 529 años. Puerto Rico fue conquistado por la corona española en 1493, fue colonia de España hasta 1898, fue una de las dos últimas colonias de España en América junto con Cuba, y a partir de 1898 es colonia de Estados Unidos, más de 124 años, la suma 529 años. No se supondría que desde este micrófono estuviera hablándote un puertorriqueño afirmando su nacionalidad, su cultura y su sentido caribeño y latinoamericano. Se supondría que nosotros hubiéramos desaparecido, que nos hubieran borrado, porque el primer gran problema del colonialismo es un problema de carácter existencial. El dominador no reconoce en el dominado un sujeto histórico. Ve una cosa que puede manipular y utilizar a su antojo. Por lo tanto, nuestra gran lucha ha sido la lucha por existir. Pero es que no solo existimos, es que además nos afirmamos orgullosamente. Porque si nosotros podemos llegar aquí para que el compañero héroe nacional, héroe de este país, de la revolución, comience diciendo que él tiene que presentar a un héroe nacional puertorriqueño que ha estado 35 años en la cárcel por luchar por la independencia de Puerto Rico, es porque hay una nación que defender y por la cual vale la pena pasar 35 años metido en una cárcel. Y eso es maravilloso. No voy ni a ser retórico ni a extenderme porque sería la locura, pero lo que yo sí te puedo plantear es, tú me dejas un correo, yo te escribo y te envío todos los materiales que tú quieras. Lo que sí te quiero es que te vayas con la seguridad cuando regreses a tu patria, de que ahí primero vas a buscar un atlas y vas a buscar en el mapa y vas a ubicarnos. Y vas a ver todas las islas que acompañan, y ¡ay diablo, que muchas islitas hay! Y qué chiquititas son en relación a Brasil. Chiquito es Brasil, que chiquito es Cuba, hizo una revolución socialista, ¿viste? Mucho más chiquito que Brasil. Si vamos a eso, ¿no? Es como 11 o 12 veces más grande que Puerto Rico, Cuba. Pero que lleven ustedes a regreso a su patria la seguridad de que allí hay un país caribeño, latinoamericano, es un país moderno, es un país en unas condiciones precarias en el plano económico, porque el modelo económico establecido hace 70 años, que fue un modelo que se fue utilizado para querer exportarlo como modelo a seguir en toda la región, que es el modelo de inversión de capitales extranjeros. El modelo de inversión de capital extranjero funciona mientras para el capital extranjero sea lucrativo invertir. En el momento en que aparecen 5 o 10 otros lugares donde ir a invertir, como no hay lealtades, el inversionista extranjero se va a esos otros lugares. Y aquel modelo que parecía tan firme, porque dependía de la inversión de capitales, comienza a entrar en precario, como efectivamente ha sucedido. Por lo tanto, el modelo económico y político de Puerto Rico está ahora mismo oficialmente en quiebra. El modelo de importación de capitales ha quebrado, ha fracasado. ¿Sí? Todo esto con una absoluta ausencia de poderes políticos para poder diseñar una propuesta económica, un plan de país. El gran problema del colonialismo que aplica a Puerto Rico es la ausencia de poderes para poder diseñar un plan de país que podría ser bueno, malo o regular. Es que nosotros ni siquiera tenemos el poder para diseñar un mal plan de país, porque eso es prerrogativa del Congreso de Estados Unidos. Esa es la gran contradicción del colonialismo, la ausencia absoluta de poderes para la toma de decisiones esenciales y estar a merced de los intereses externos en todo cuanto suceda en nuestro país. A pesar de toda esa realidad, estamos aquí. Una de las consecuencias directas que es importante que ustedes tengan presente en el caso de Puerto Rico, de esta crisis económica recurrente, ha sido la emigración masiva como una válvula de escape a la presión social enorme que supone la crisis económica y social, al extremo de que se da en Puerto Rico una situación atípica. En Puerto Rico vivimos algo así como 3.2 millones de personas, y en Estados Unidos viven más o menos 5 millones de compatriotas. Es decir, en las pasadas décadas, el volumen de puertorriqueños y puertorriqueñas residentes en Estados Unidos es mayor que en Puerto Rico. Esa es una consecuencia neta de la crisis económica y social de la colonia, que obliga a hombres, mujeres, a personas muchas veces preparadas profesionalmente, técnicamente, con destreza, a irse del país en la búsqueda de alguna seguridad. Yo pienso que probablemente esa sea la muestra más elocuente del fracaso del modelo colonial, ese que alguna vez se vendió como la alternativa para toda América Latina. Pero no te voy a decir más porque nos vamos a cansar y además los compañeros y compañeras, yo sé que tienen como 15 otras preguntas que hacer. No, no es cierto. Gracias.
Gracias. Saludos a todos los presentes, saludos al compañero Fernando González George, a los compañeros en el panel, Julio, Edwin y al compañero Oscar López y todos los presentes. Primero agradecer la pregunta del compañero y lo que quería hacer, si me lo permiten, ya que no son tantas las oportunidades de responder a preguntas sobre lo que está pasando en Puerto Rico. Quería un poco quizá complementar el excelente trasfondo que ha dado el compañero Julio Muriente sobre la situación actual en Puerto Rico, sobre todo la manera en que han deteriorado las condiciones objetivas en el país y también la gran lucha histórica que ha dado el pueblo de Puerto Rico por su existencia y también por la independencia plena. Solamente quería añadir que parte del problema de la coyuntura actual en Puerto Rico es que según en el mundo se ha ido desarrollando un capitalismo que hemos venido a llamar capitalismo salvaje. En Puerto Rico se ha desarrollado lo que podemos llamar el colonialismo salvaje y que en último se ve que el colonialismo en Puerto Rico se ha recrudecido. Se ha recrudecido más que nada el reflejo mayor de ese recrudecimiento del coloniaje en Puerto Rico, el colonialismo en Puerto Rico, es el nombramiento de una Junta de Control Fiscal sobre las finanzas del pueblo de Puerto Rico. Que para darle solamente un ejemplo, en Puerto Rico en los últimos años han cerrado más de 400 escuelas públicas, que es parte de la política social, solamente una mínima parte de la política social que impone la Junta de Control Fiscal, que ha sido nombrada sobre el pueblo puertorriqueño, sobre las entidades electas por el pueblo puertorriqueño, con todas sus deficiencias, esas entidades electas, pero a fin de cuentas electas por el pueblo de Puerto Rico. Pues esta Junta de Control Fiscal está por encima de esas entidades electas en Puerto Rico, con el fin de que se le pague la deuda a Wall Street que acumularon gobiernos corruptos y coloniales a través de los años en Puerto Rico. Así que eso es un reflejo también de la realidad que vive el pueblo de Puerto Rico, de recrudecimiento del coloniaje. Y por otro lado también, disculpen que me extienda un poquito, pero para finalizar, hay que decir también, me parece, que en Puerto Rico ha habido en los últimos años, a partir sobre todo también de esta crisis profunda y recrudecimiento del colonialismo y colonialismo salvaje, producto del capitalismo salvaje, ha habido una diversificación de la lucha por la independencia, que va de la mano con una diversificación de la lucha social que se da en el país. Y eso me parece muy, muy importante en la coyuntura actual, donde tenemos en el país un consenso anticolonial. Si bien es cierto que todavía en cuanto a la solución final luchamos los independentistas porque esa solución sea la independencia, pero en sí el consenso político es anticolonial. Y parte de lo que eso significa y parte de lo que ha sido señales que vienen de Estados Unidos es que ya la situación en Puerto Rico colonial, a partir del deterioro social y a partir del desprestigio que representa el colonialismo, tiene que haber un cambio próximamente en Puerto Rico, en los próximos años. Puede que sean 10 años, puede que sean 15, puede que yo lo vea, que los que estamos aquí lo veamos o no lo veamos, pero sí con las condiciones que he tratado y que Julio Muriente ha tratado de describir, es evidente que viene un cambio para Puerto Rico. Y finalizo con 2 puntos. Primero, que parte fundamental de la coyuntura es la continua identidad, como ha dicho Julio, de la identidad puertorriqueña. Una cultura vibrante que incluso se exporta, como probablemente ustedes saben, por los artistas puertorriqueños. Por último, también plantear la creciente lucha social nuevamente, enfatizar eso. Cuando este cambio que esperamos que sí se va a dar en Puerto Rico, porque ya el Estado Libre Asociado ha colapsado, es muy importante la solidaridad internacional, y por eso agradezco mucho a nuestro compañero de Brasil que ha hecho esta pregunta. Le pido al compañero, le pido a todos excusas por el que me extendí, le doy las gracias a Julio y le pido excusas también por haberme extendido. Gracias.
Gracias, Olga. Yo no creo que haya sido muy extensa, yo creo que ha sido esclarecedor también. Le vamos a dar la palabra a una compañera, yo estoy seguro que usted está de acuerdo que la compañera... adelante.
Bueno, buenas tardes.
Graciela Ramírez.
Graciela Ramírez. Soy argentina y vivo en Cuba. Trabajo en solidaridad y en un medio de comunicación que se llama Resumen Latinoamericano. Julio, le quería comentarles 2 cosas. Una, algo muy simbólico que está ocurriendo en esta sala en este momento. Es la presencia justamente de Óscar López Rivera y de nuestro Fernando González Llor. Fernando, ustedes saben, es presidente del Instituto Cubano de Amistad con los Pueblos del ICAP y héroe de la República de Cuba. Cuando uno lo ve con su estrellita y la banderita cubana y pregunta por qué lo hicieron héroe, héroe por su dignidad y por su junto a 4 hermanos de causa en una prisión durísima en Estados Unidos por más de 13 años en el caso de Fernando. Y lo simbólico es que está aquí justamente Óscar López, que estuvo preso más de 30 años, y ellos coincidieron en la misma prisión estadounidense. Y esto que se da entre un héroe de Puerto Rico y un héroe de Cuba, más allá de lo simbólico, es la fuerza que nos da a nosotros para luchar por todas nuestras causas. En Brasil, en Argentina tenemos presa a Milagro Sala, tenemos encausada a nuestra vicepresidenta Cristina Fernández, la han proscripto políticamente para el resto de la vida. Tenemos grandes preocupaciones, el bloqueo terrible contra Cuba, que es algo ya demencial a esta altura del milenio, que provoca un daño feroz en la población en todos los esferas de la vida nacional. Pero esto de tener a Fernando por un lado, que volvió a la vida después de 13 años oscurísimos junto con sus 4 hermanos, y tener a Óscar López, después de 30 años, con todo lo que sufrió su hija, que está aquí, su familia, es como una bendición para todos los que luchamos, ¿no? Yo quería comentar algo también simbólico. Ayer una compañera de Brasil, que está ahora en la sala 3 porque está hablando Frei Beto, y llevó mucha gente allí. Una compañera de Brasil me trajo este pullover. Yo me lo puse porque, bueno, porque tenía, porque además lo amo. Este pullover en nombre del MST de Brasil, un pullover muy simbólico, dice: la dignidad tiene rostro de mujer. El rostro que ustedes ven, sobre todo para los jóvenes que están aquí, es de una mujer puertorriqueña que amó mucho a Cuba y que amó mucho a la humanidad y que quiso el bien y la amistad entre el pueblo de Estados Unidos y el pueblo cubano. Ella no hizo más, eso fue todo su crimen y pagó carísimo su pensamiento, su conciencia, y ha estado 21 años presa. Ella acaba de salir, está con su familia en su Puerto Rico querido, es puertorriqueña. Y bueno, por ahora no podremos abrazarla ni verla porque encima tiene 5 años de libertad condicionada, pero le podemos mandar besos y abrazos y decirle que este pullover que tenemos, que nos mandan los compañeros del MST de Brasil, que dice: la dignidad tiene tiene rostro de mujer, lo llevamos con mucho orgullo. Y nos ayuda para luchar por la libertad de Milagro, nos ayuda para luchar por Cristina, nos ayuda para luchar contra el bloqueo. Y bueno, nos ayuda a todos, ¿no? Eso es una cosa, Julio, y lo otro que ahora voy. Ayer el presidente cubano, Díaz-Canel, en la reunión de la CELAC, que fue muy importante, la 7ª cumbre, hizo una declaración extraordinaria en los pocos minutos en que se pueden hacer esas declaraciones, menos de 10 minutos. Pero Díaz-Canel, entre las muchas cosas que denunció y habló, él planteó 2 cuestiones que tienen que ver. Una, justamente la solidaridad de Cuba incondicional con la causa de Puerto Rico, es decir, la causa por la descolonización de Puerto Rico. E inmediatamente dijo él también el apoyo a la demanda de Malvinas de mi país, de Argentina, y las Islas Sandwich del Sur y demás, por la descolonización. 2 temas que están en el Comité de Descolonización de la ONU. Ahí va mi pregunta, Julio. ¿Tú crees que en este momento, con Lula, que tenemos la alegría de que ha vuelto al poder, con Petro, que es un avance inmenso, impensable en Colombia, y con esta resistencia de Cuba, vamos a ver qué pasa? Ojalá podamos salvar a Argentina del naufragio en el que pueda caer si asume la derecha en octubre de este año, compañeros. Pero ¿tú crees que este nuevo relanzamiento de la CELAC, esta fortaleza que empieza nuevamente a tener en la unidad en los países de América Latina, pueden de alguna manera acelerar el proceso para que algún día Puerto Rico se descolonice y las Malvinas vuelvan a ser Argentina?
Primero que todo, de quien habrá de depender principalmente que esa aspiración que compartimos se materialice, será del pueblo de Puerto Rico. Pero el pueblo de Puerto Rico, no lo olvidemos, el pueblo de Puerto Rico enfrenta directamente a la potencia imperialista más poderosa del mundo. Esta no es la Angola que enfrentaba al decadente Portugal, o el Mozambique o Sao Tomé y Príncipe que enfrentaban al decadente Portugal en África. Nosotros fuimos la primera colonia del muy joven imperialismo yanqui, junto con Cuba, a partir del desenlace de la guerra del 98. Por lo tanto, la situación más desigual no podría ser. Por consiguiente, la solidaridad, que es lo que tú estás planteando, resulta indispensable para que nuestro proceso, del cual en primera instancia seremos nosotros, tendremos que ser nosotros inevitablemente y necesariamente los protagonistas principales, pero que pueda avanzar. En la medida en que justamente en el contexto y el espíritu martiano, Cuba y Puerto Rico son ese valladar para impedir ese avance terrible, en esa misma medida es un asunto que concierne a los pueblos de nuestra América. En septiembre del año 2021, la CELAC se reunió en México, en la Ciudad de México, y allí la CELAC aprobó un documento muy importante a la causa de Puerto Rico. Aprobó una declaración especial. O sea, más allá del documento final que se aprueba en ese tipo de reunión, hubo una declaración especial sobre Puerto Rico. Y en resumidas cuentas, lo que esa declaración especial plantea, que fue aprobado por la totalidad de los 30 y tantos países de CELAC, lo que plantea esencialmente esa declaración especial, que CELAC asume la causa de Puerto Rico como propia. Es decir, que le concierne a los pueblos de nuestra América el tema de la autodeterminación e independencia de Puerto Rico en el contexto del derecho internacional vigente, le hace resolución 151415 y cualquiera otra, que por lo tanto es de la jurisdicción, lejos de la visión que quiere imponer Estados Unidos de que se trata de un asunto interno de Estados Unidos. América Latina y el Caribe le responde a través de CELAC: no, señores, este es un asunto interno de América Latina y el Caribe, y lo asumimos. Esa declaración es muy importante y ha de haberse ratificado la posición de CELAC en la cumbre recién concluida. Pero yendo más allá, nosotros quisiéramos pensar que los procesos que se van dando en países como Colombia, como Honduras, como Chile, como Brasil, México, incidieran en este proceso y que se elevara la jerarquía que se le adjudica a la solidaridad con la causa de Puerto Rico. Somos conscientes de que la solidaridad con la causa de Puerto Rico, la lectura que hace Washington, es que es un enfrentamiento con Estados Unidos, por lo tanto no es tan sencillo anticipar, como por ejemplo con Cuba, que está, como diríamos en Puerto Rico, va por el carril del medio, ¿no?, en la solidaridad con nuestra causa. Es complejo, pero quisiéramos pensar que Lula, que Petro, que Boric, que Xiomara asumirán, que Evo y los compañeros en Bolivia, que Daniel, como lo han hecho en el pasado, elevarán la calidad de la solidaridad con la causa de Puerto Rico, advirtiendo y reiterando, subrayo esto por un elemental sentido de responsabilidad política y social, la mayor de las solidaridades internacionales, se pierde en el vacío si los protagonistas principales de las respectivas luchas, es decir, los pueblos mismos, no se hacen merecedores de esa solidaridad. O sea, nosotros desde Puerto Rico tenemos que generar una lucha por la independencia nacional que nos haga merecedores de tanta solidaridad, porque cada iniciativa solidaria que lleva a cabo un gobierno de estos que tú mencionas supone un compromiso